Hi, good evening. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council for February 18th, 2015. Can we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Haroff?
Here.
Councilmember Hilmer?
Here.
Councilmember Morrison?
Here.
Vice Mayor Way?
Here.
Mayor Chu?
Here. Okay, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. We have a lot of people that I've never seen before, so welcome to Larkspur City Council meeting. Being that some of you are unfamiliar with the process that we have, and if you didn't pick up an agenda, there'll be a couple opportunities for the public to speak tonight, once on items that are not on the agenda, and the only item that we have as a public hearing tonight is on our housing element. So we typically like to maintain as much decorum and respect for the various speakers, whether it be someone at the podium, someone behind the dais here, or one of our staff. So if you could refrain from interrupting people when they speak, or no personal attacks, and just address the council. And I know it's real intimidating for people who have never spoken in public before, so we'll try and keep the no applause, no boos. Want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak and to get their viewpoints, respectfully heard by both the council and other members of the public. Okay, so the first item on our agenda is approval of the consent calendar. Would any members of the council or the public like to remove an item for discussion or questions? We have warrants, minutes from February 4th, and a management agreement for animal control services with the Marin General Services Authority. Okay, seeing none, I will take a motion from council, please.
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
And I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is a report by our city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I love to show pictures when I have one that tells a good story. And we have a lot of interesting things going on in our community and in our neighboring communities. Some of you are aware there's a nice discussion, public discussion about flood control efforts going on. In Larkspur, flood control has a lot to do with dredging Corte Madera Creek. And there are certainly folks on each side of this issue about the merits or need for dredging Corte Madera Creek. And since this debate has started, we've had past council members and many residents give me a lot of interesting photographs from over the years of times when there's been siltation and problems in the creek that's resulted in flooding. I like this photo I wanted to show you because we took it, and we just took this photo. Councilmember Morrison might know where this is. It's actually right near your house. Yeah, and we actually had to dig the channel that you see so that to allow the water to move from where it had built up after our last rainstorm out to the creek. And this is an example of when dredging doesn't happen and the siltation is allowed to build up, this is what happens up and down the creek. So we do have an issue, and it's the one that I know Councilmember Hilmer is advocating for you at the flood zone number 9, but I really liked this picture. I wanted to share it with you. It was our guys out there with the shovels that dug that trench to make sure that water would get out from where it was building up. The council members know, but the public may not know, but may want to know that we're on a soft launch of being on television tonight. So we are actually being broadcast this evening, which is a first for Larkspur. And we're excited about that. And I want to thank our friends at the Media Center for their efforts to get us up and running. We had a very nice meeting here that I suspect Vice Mayor Way and Councilmember Morrison will talk a little bit about regarding our Library and Community Center project here last night, Engage the Community. We're actually moving at an incredible clip because we're getting so much dynamic feedback from the community, and we're really appreciative of that. Our next step in the process is going to involve a special meeting of the council at 5:30 on March 4th, which is your next council date. We're going to actually, at 5:30, meet at the site. And we're going to walk around the outside of the site and talk about the general dynamics of the property and the scale and some general issues for you as a group and then for anyone who attends. And then we'll be taking the council meeting over to Central Marin's community room and continuing the council meeting there. So on March 4, that's the plan, and we'll be posting information and putting out invitations for that. The long-anticipated first meeting of the Traffic Committee for Twin Cities took place, and I suspect that Councilmember Harf and Councilmember Morrison will talk a little bit about that. We're already working to schedule another meeting. We pushed it back an extra week from when the council members want to meet, but that's because we're putting together an RFP, and we need a little extra time at staff level. But I want folks to know, now that the committee's meeting, we're getting right to work on studying the corridor that begins at Magnolia and Dougherty and travels all the way through the loop into Corte Madera and then back around on the east side of the freeway up to the Redwood Highway entrance to 101. And we're going to be looking at ways we can improve traffic flow as two distinct jurisdictions, how we can work together to improve traffic flow through that corridor. I don't often take a lot of opportunity to acknowledge when staff's leaving at a meeting like this. I usually tell you about staff that's joined us. But we've been very blessed in Larkspur to have, in my opinion, the best recreation staff I've ever experienced and probably ever will experience. And that was reflected in a hire we did 3 years ago of Shannon Clegg as our recreation supervisor. And I don't think anybody in 3 years' time could have anticipated how Shannon would expand the offerings that we're providing, particularly to the teen and the tween community. We've actually tripled our activity in those areas since Shannon came on board. Well, not shockingly, another community has offered Shannon an opportunity to move up the ladder. But I wanted to acknowledge her tonight for you because I won't see you again in this forum before she leaves us. If you have a chance down at Recreation to say hi to Shannon and wish her well. She's moving on to Calistoga. I really am amazed at the energy this young woman brought. And I know that Dick Whitley, if he was here, would tell you he's still reeling from the idea that she's going to be gone. So I really want to just thank Shannon for her contributions to Larkspur. And with that, Mr. Mayor, we certainly have a big topic tonight, so I think I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have any questions or comments for the city manager? Okay, if not, now's the time for council members for their reports and comments. Does anyone have anything they'd like to report out on?
Sure. I'll
Okay.
go first. I went to the Marin Traffic Crisis Community Meeting, and I know that Dan Helmer is probably going to talk a little bit about that. And at the meeting, we had Supervisors Steve Kinsey and Katie Rice. We had Transportation of Marin, Bay Area Toll Authority of Marin, and Assemblyman Mark Levine. They talked about the third lane, of you read in the newspaper, being open on the eastbound and the pedestrian walkway on the westbound. It was very exciting because, and Mark Levine's going to try to improve the process and make it quicker than 2018, which is exciting. But what I really want to announce that Steve Kinsey is really taking a heart making sure that 101 and 580 get connected. That's his next big project, along with Dan Helmer, which I'm sure he'll continue discussing maybe tonight. I also went to the Corte Madera and Larkspur Traffic Committee. Kevin Harf and I sit on that committee, and I thought we met with 2 council members from Corte Madera along with the city manager, and I thought it was just going to be a round table, but oh no. We have our city manager walks in with our director, and they have, which was so impressive, they come so well prepared and brings the whole traffic concern that we need to discuss, along with each intersection that needs to be discussed, to make sure that when the Wind Cup does get, when people do by the residents and people move in with cars, we will make sure that the traffic flow is as best as possible. So it's very impressive, Dan. It was a good meeting. And then also, the Larkspur Library and Community Center public presentation was last night, which I believe that our Vice Mayor Catherine Way will also continue discussing. It was the design of the building, which is going to be one level, 20,000 square feet. We talked about the building entrance and the community spaces, teen zone, collection, and readers, the children library, and like Dan said, on March the 4th, we're going to meet at the parcel and have a walkthrough. So again, it was a good week for the meetings that I attended. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hilmer?
I support everything she said regarding the transportation issue. I attended the Flood Zone 9 Advisory Board meeting. This is dealing with flood control issues in the Ross Valley. I was made sure with great support from our staff that we represented the interests of Larkspur, especially those in the Hillview neighborhood where flooding conditions are created by the silt buildup as represented in the photos there. We also discussed and I proposed audio recording of these meetings so that there are better public information available. Currently, there really is inadequate public record kept of the meetings. Larkspur's interests regarding the methodology ranking flood control projects were expressed to make sure the Corte Madera Creek dredging is protected and the baseline measures for flood control. We raised questions about budget priorities and model projects in the North Bay that were used to create the strategy and defining projects such as retention basins like those proposed in San Anselmo and Fairfax to make sure that the characteristics and costs are really relevant to what's proper for the Ross Valley and not out of control costs and project characteristics like massive amounts of grading that would send the costs sky high. I was selected to be on a budget subcommittee for the Flood Control District Advisory Board so that we can make informed recommendations to the Flood District, which is the Board of Supervisors. And I want to thank our staff, our city manager, and Mary Grace Houlihan, our Public Works Director, for providing me great technical background and information so that we could effectively represent the city's interests. That's my report, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Way?
Yes, I have two things to mention to the council members and to the public. Thank you, Ann, for those reports about the Larkspur Library and Community Center and the North Bay Leadership meeting that we both attended. My report is about the Twin Cities Disaster Preparedness Committee that I chair. And one of our goals between Corte Madera, Larkspur, and Green Bay are to develop neighborhood response groups in each neighborhood. And it's self-created by neighbors within those groups with the support of this committee. So the Blue Rock neighborhood, which sits up here behind us, met on Sunday for their first time with a very well-organized group. And about 80 residents of the Blue Rock neighborhood met for a potluck to share a disaster preparedness in their neighborhood. So if you're in a neighborhood that isn't being organized in a neighborhood response group, I encourage you to come to the Twin Cities Disaster Council meetings on Thursday, second Thursday of the month, and get involved in that. It's very important that we're all prepared for the wildland fire and the earthquakes and the floods that will happen.
Thank you. Councilmember Haroff, do you have anything?
Well, I guess. Really, you all have kind of covered my stuff. So just two footnotes on the traffic. One on our local committee meeting with Corte Madera. I thought it was a terrific meeting, and I agree with everything that was said about that. I will note that it's taken us about a year to get that meeting going, or that process going. But I think it was a little bit tense at the beginning. But I think we kind of overcame some trepidation with some of the meeting attendants, and that was good. So I'm very glad to see that we've gotten started with that process, and I look forward to continuing to participate in that. It was actually the Bay Area Council's sponsored meeting, the leadership meeting on the bridge issue, and I did go to that too. And I guess I came away with it maybe a little less optimistic about how that process will go forward than maybe some others who attended it. I wasn't able to attend the entire meeting, but I still think there are a lot of questions that are raised by the process that is being envisioned for particularly the way in which the traffic lane issue is being conjoined with the bike lane issue. Without commenting on the merits of either, I think there's some real serious issues that may or may not be addressed by Mark's legislation. And I think there's some serious cost issues that are associated with the project that were not actually clarified at that meeting, but in fact were obscured to some extent. So I think we still have our work cut out for us with that whole process. And I do encourage people to pay attention to what's going on with it. There are, I know Dick Spotswood had an article in the IJ just a day or so ago about the lack of demand analysis for the bike lane, which is a legitimate issue. But actually, more importantly to me, are the way in which costs are being dealt with in that project. And I do think, as I said, it's important for the public to remain vigilant and keep our public officials involved in that process, honest about what's being done.
Okay, thank you. The only thing I need to report out on this for the council and staff is that Finance and Policy Committee of the Marin Telecommunications Agency came up with their recommendation to the full board on Larkspur's withdrawal from the MTA. And the option that they are taking is not our preferred option. I'm going to write this up so that I can provide a more detailed report for staff and the council, but I just want to mention that because we are going to need to get this on our agenda either in the first or second meeting of March to decide what we want to do with the outstanding resolution we have as our intent to withdraw. Okay, thank you. Now's the time for public comments. This is the time when the public has an opportunity to address the council on a matter that is not on the agenda tonight. We typically set aside 15 minutes for this, and for anyone who decides that they want to come up, just raise their hand. What I'd like to do, though, is to start with Becky Reed from Corte Madera, because I forgot to get her on the agenda for tonight, so she will just make her comments during this period.
Okay, thank you. I'm Becky Reed. I'm the coordinator. Can you hear me okay? I'm the coordinator of Corte Madera Centennial. Our city town was incorporated 8 years after you, so we're following along. In 2016, we'll hold our centennial. So I've talked with Catherine and Larry, and that I just want to let you know what we're talking about, because our towns are connected through our schools, through our police department, through our communities. My kids went to school with 4 of your kids. My daughter babysat the mayor's kids. So we're very connected. We do want to let you know what we're doing, invite you to join us for our celebrations. So I've given this to the town council, and I want to emphasize the upper left-hand corner word, tentative. It's still 11 months off. All these things could change. But just so you know for your calendars, right now, it will start with a big New Year's Eve party at the Corte Madera Community Center put on by the Lions Club with members of the Centennial Committee. A big festive start for the year. And then throughout the year, there are a number of things that are being planned. Some have been put on the calendar. Some are still being talked about and aren't on the agenda yet. Christmas Tree Hill Drillers are planning to do something in April. There will be an auto show in May. There will be a big Centennial Weekend celebration, much like what you all did, what Kathy Hartzell organized for you all. And our date is June 10th, so we've booked that weekend. We'll be in the parade, just as you were. And they're actually talking fireworks. No guarantees on that. I don't know how they're going to do it, but someone is talking fireworks. We do have a tentative dance set for September 10th. We don't know yet. We don't have a definite committee. We don't know exactly if it'll be a teen party or a big gala or what, but just to let you know that date is reserved at this point. Women's Club will put on an ice cream social. We'll be involved in the Oktoberfest. There'll be a lot of things going on all year. I will let the mayor know, and he can pass it out to you as we identify dates. But just want to let you know and to welcome you all to come and join us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. We'll look forward to those events. Okay, first of all, if anybody has a seat next to them that's not occupied, can you raise your hand so that, okay, yeah, we have probably about a half a dozen on this side, one in the front here for anyone who'd like to sit down. Okay, would anyone else like to address the council on a matter that's not on the agenda tonight?
I think you hit
Welcome, Mayor Lundstrom.
Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to speak about city pensions.
Oh, can I just ask you to
I'm
just
sorry,
state your name and city for the
Joan
record?
Lundstrom, 48 Francis Avenue, Larkspur, California.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak as your former mayor and longtime council member about the city pensions. For the record, Larkspur should get a lot of credit for saving thousands and thousands of dollars in city pension costs. How? The Larkspur City Council never, over the years, gave in to fire and police union demands for retirement at age 55, plus 3 years credit. Independent fire districts all around us and most other cities gave those retirement benefits a long time ago. Larkspur stayed at age 50 with 3 years credit. It'd be interesting to do the math on this, of the accumulated savings, but the record shows that Larkspur City Council continuously went for the lower retirement for the public safety employees, and that has saved a lot of money to the city in terms of public pension requirements. Thank you.
Okay, we're 3 at 55 now. We didn't give in to the 3 at 50.
No.
Correct.
No.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
that.
and according to City Manager Schwartz, now the state mandates with new hires, it'd be retirement age 57. Yeah. So it was extended, but we stayed at 55.
Good, thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council on a matter that's not on our agenda tonight? Yes.
Yeah, David from Larkspur. Just real quick about that Marin Airporter. It's apparently being kicked out of its space down there on the landing. I really like the service. It's really convenient. I'd hate to see it get relocated to San Rafael, which is what they're talking about. So I noticed that it was actually in the general plan that you had a policy explicitly supported the retention of the airporter for that use. So it'd just be great if we could come up with a proactive plan to kind of keep it either in that spot, or maybe people are talking about the old Denny's, something outside the box. But, if we could just really honor that general plan policy, that'd be good.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Kathleen Mulcahy, Larkspur. I keep saying that because I keep going back and forth to different cities. I was almost in a sit-in just down the street in the police office. A few of us were. Ross Valley Sanitary District went into closed session, and I believe most of the board, if not all, are aware of the background on that issue. And it does tie together with what was mentioned about the 580-101 exchange and the bridge, because it's a very important piece of property at 2000 Larkspur Landing Circle. And that particular piece of property is now under closed discussions in regards to moving its ownership from the Ross Valley Sanitary District over the hill. And out of our jurisdiction after being litigated, and ratepayers in Larkspur fending a lot of the recent monies in order to, have a say within our whole district. And there's been members of the board have been very diligent about communicating and keeping Larkspur involved in properties within our jurisdiction. And this is one of them. So keep an eye. There's been some videos that'll be coming your way. But it's a very, very important piece of property that's going on. And it's not publicized whatsoever. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to address the council this evening? Okay, so I guess now we move on to the public hearing item, which is what you're all here for. Tonight, our public hearing item is a review of the draft of our 2015 to 2023 housing element and the consideration for submittal of that document in its first draft to California Department of Community Development, Housing and Community Development. So the process that we will use here is that we will have our staff make a short presentation, and that will be followed by questions that the council may have for staff. And after that, we will allow the public to come up and make their comments, and then will be closed to the public, and the council will come back and discuss, their own preferences or whatever feedback they want to provide. Tonight, there's a resolution that is outstanding, and that will be what is under consideration. That resolution will support the submittal of the draft to California HCD. So I will turn it over to our planning director, Mr. Neil Toff.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Chu and members of the City Council. This is the City Council's first initial review of the 2015 to 2023 housing element. Why don't we go ahead? What is a housing element? It's one of 7 required elements of the city's general plan. Housing elements have typically been required on a 5-year schedule. However, with new regulations put in under SB 375 in 2008 and new procedures by the HCD, the housing element can undergo a streamlined review and be updated every 8 years to be in concert with transportation planning. Why have a housing element? Well, land use planning is fundamentally a local issue, but the availability of housing is a statewide concern. It's a matter of, it's a state policy goal to have local governments be accountable for ensuring that projected housing needs can be accommodated for a variety of reasons, to provide affordable housing, to have jobs near work and near transit. What happens if the city does not have an housing element that's certified by the state? This can result in legal action and a court order. These can require mandatory compliance. The city can end up forfeiting local control of permitting, not just for residential uses, but also for commercial permits. And it can result in mandatory approval of housing projects, not just on opportunity sites, but on other sites within the city. It can also require carryover of unfilled RENA or housing needs to the next cycle, and it can reduce access to infrastructure and community development funding. This update process, we actually had a workshop back in October and had our first hearing at the Planning Commission in January. And we're now here before the City Council before undergoing review by HCD. So essentially, we're proposing to you a draft that would undergo HCD review. It's a 60-day review by state law. And then with those comments, we would bring back the draft to the Planning Commission for review in April or May and possible adoption by the City Council. In order to qualify for this 8-year streamlined review, this funding cycle, the housing element should be adopted by the City Council by May 31st. This is in order to avoid having to do a 4-year review and go back to HCD on a 4-year basis. The housing element has some specific requirements for demographic and housing needs, opportunities and constraints for housing development, policies and programs to promote housing and to meet the regional housing needs, and to evaluate the performance of the current or past housing element. Our housing element addresses these specific topics in order to demonstrate how we can meet our fair share of housing. The city, in doing this update, the city is challenged. There's limitations on what Larkspur can do to create housing. It's not the requirement of the city to provide housing, simply provide the avenues through zoning and policy to create the possibility for housing. The city is approaching build-out. Residential sites are very steep and located in low-density neighborhoods. Very constrained properties. The primary opportunities in our existing 2010 housing element and the sites that we are proposing to carry over are largely through a number of vacant, underutilized sites that are largely mixed-use properties and through second units. In terms of one of the major requirements of the housing element, of course, is our regional housing needs and our requirement under ABAG to ensure that there is sufficient and appropriately zoned land for new housing and to address projected population growth and job generation. In our latest RENA counts, HCD provided a need for the Bay Area, and what you see here is a graphic that shows the requirement for Larkspur at 132 units in Marin County, and that being part of the Bay Area under ABAG. And what I'd like to note is this chart actually is not to scale. Marin County is actually just 1.2% of the Bay Area's regional housing need, and Larkspur is 5.7 of the county's RENA percent. Larkspur's population is actually less than 5% of the county. And one thing I'd like to note with that last slide is Plan Bay Area did in fact result in some reductions to the percentage of housing required for counties like Marin County and Napa. The RENA for Larkspur is 35% of the last RENA process. Again, this is derived from Plan Bay Area. Our total is 132 units for this 2014 to 2022 category RENA. The remaining challenge is to meet the very low income, 40 units for very low income, and we'll get into more detail on that as we go on. The RENA categories are, as you see, broken up by income, and for a family of four, the very low income is for a income of up to $57,000, and that's 50% of the median. What is a streamlined review? This has been coming up. We've been proposing to comply with this process, and it's a benefit to have the city in an 8-year cycle rather than having to review and update the housing element through HCD in 4 years. And for this streamlined review, the housing element that's been provided to the council is provided on the website is basically shows a track changes. The HCD will review, under this process, will review only those changes that are made to the housing element. So what we've had to do is update a number of sections to correct demographics, update certain numbers, and make corrections on certain adjustments. But essentially, what you see are highlights for track changes and highlights just for entire new sections and tables in the housing element update. And one thing to keep in mind, again, HCD will just review what is changed through the housing element. So essentially, we've done an update of the 2010 housing element. Keep in mind this is a working draft document, but one of the first things we've done is updated the demographic and housing needs analysis. And a couple trends that we've seen are the population is growing slowly. And in concert with that, jobs are projected to grow slowly through the next 25 years, up to 2040. In terms of age group, our trends have been over the last 20 years that the child population has been increasing slightly, and the middle percentage of adult population has been decreasing. The projections for Marin County are that the child population should largely flatten out, and it will be the senior population that will be growing significantly over the next several years. In the needs analysis, we did I have not provided all the demographic slides on age differentials and household types and incomes and affordability costs. But the needs analysis demonstrates some need for additional housing to accommodate the small rate of population growth, a need for the seniors, the ability to age in place, and to provide smaller units for more affordable options for young adults and workforce as well. We've provided changes to the housing constraints chapter in reflection of updates to our zoning ordinance that we've performed in order to comply with the eligibility for streamlined review. We've provided for zoning for emergency shelters in the AP districts. We've provided for transitional and supportive housing as a use within residential zones. We've identified reasonable accommodations for ADA or disabled persons, and we've adopted a density bonus ordinance for the city that helps us to manage the state density bonus and concessions and incentives requirements of the state law. Before I go into the sites, I'm just going to jump quickly into some of the goals and policies. We've essentially brought forward, carried over the goals and policies otherwise from the prior housing elements. We're confident we can meet RHNA on our existing sites, but we recognize changing the need for the aging demographic to stay at home. One of the items that we've identified for a new program would be the junior second units. A number of other cities are adopting this program as a way of encouraging second units and helping to support particularly aging in place living. And what this is basically a small second unit light that would have a bathroom and a kitchenette and a secondary entrance and does not necessarily require additional parking, something that would be built within an existing home as opposed to adding on a second unit, a fully independent second unit. This can be for people, again, support for elderly or simply family that needs to stay, older, young adults who are staying at home, or house help as well. There's been discussion about meeting our housing need with second units, and there is some challenges in terms of that. Using surveys throughout the county, we believe we can apply affordability for second units pretty much as an even split between very low, low, and moderate affordability. However, projections for developing second units are based on past performance, and we have been at nearly 1 unit per year. So for the 8-year cycle, that would project to 8 units over the next 8-year cycle. Projections for converting existing unauthorized units actually does not technically count towards your RHNA. So as a policy, you can't really say we're going to convert existing units, unauthorized units, and have that count towards your RHNA. And I think the reality that is, if through time we do identify and authorize units, we can probably work those into the formula somewhat, but it's not something you can rely on in terms of your projections. Can we meet our RHNA with second units if we add junior second units? Well, we do anticipate doubling our rate with this more flexible approach. We're hopeful in doing that. This would result in 16 total second units over the next 8 years. And splitting that out to the various income categories, that gives us 5 very low, 6 low, and 5 moderate. As we've indicated in the staff report, most cities are taking the approach of somewhere between just simply maintaining their current rate of production to possibly adding half again or doubling their rate of production on this. Virtually no other city is really relying on second units in order to meet their housing need, particularly if those numbers are fairly large. It can help, but it doesn't get us there. And again, our performance in this over the next cycle can help inform our next planning cycle. In terms of the site inventory, again, what we're proposing is to carry over the same sites that were identified in the 2010 housing element. We've explained, we're indicating we can hopefully apply a default density standard on several of these sites to meet the very low and low RHNA requirement, and also include second units and junior second units to help meet this requirement. Under our current cycle, we do have projects that are either under construction within this last year or approved that are forwarded to our current cycle, and as a result, our remaining need is for 37 very low income units. However, that does remain a challenge because it's difficult to develop very low income units or project a high projection for that. Applying the default density to a variety of mixed-use commercial sites, we anticipate sort of carrying over the sites from the prior housing element and actually reducing our anticipated goal for Bon Air. We would get towards 102 units that could be applied towards the low and very low category. We also have some miscellaneous sites, again, carried over from the prior housing element. One of these is the McLaren property, and I'll show you these later. That actually doesn't carry over affordable housing. That's just a site that was identified before. Discornia, it's a low density development. So including these with the new second units, we yield a limited amount of affordable housing. So going through 4 of these major sites, one of them is the Bon Air Shopping Center. This is a site that was identified in our 2010 housing element. And this is a site made up of actually 4 properties, one of them being a CVS property and 3 others that are owned in some form by the Schultz family interests. In regards to this site, it is designated commercial. So under our general plan, we anticipate this for a mixed use, primarily commercial designation. It allows residential only above the commercial uses. The planned development for that center provides for a 35-foot height limit in areas where you might have a single-story store, not a large box. That might allow for 2 additional floors of residential above. Commercial expansion of the site is limited, strictly limited by Policy C of the general plan, which does not allow commercial development expansions that add to PM peak hour traffic. Residential development is exempted from Policy C only if it does provide at least 50% affordable housing and or senior or disabled units. The property owners have indicated that to build above the commercial would likely require reconstruction of any of the commercial buildings. We do note that the sites from the Molly Stones to the west are the older part of the center, and the sites from Molly Stones to the east side, including CVS, are newer, built back in the 80s, but they would all require significant reconstruction to build over. Other sites are the CLASP subareas 1 and 2. These are zoned for downtown commercial and mixed use. These are primarily identified for commercial use under the CLASP and general plan. However, the CLASP does identify for 19 potential units on subarea 1, which is the area around the city parking lot and the stores across from the movie theater, and up to 28 potential units on the 3 properties that make up the Lucky site. This is a slide of the McLaren property, and again, it's not a site that really creates affordability. It's just identified as part of the housing inventory. It's a site that could provide up potentially 6 single-family homes. It was a site that actually at one time was considered for some higher density development for a prior general plan in 2004. And that was met with a significant resistance because it is surrounded by low-density residential development. Another site that's in our general plan and housing element is the Discornia property, and a very large site, but very constrained by woodland and steep hills. So as a result, under the low density, we anticipate it would yield possibly 28 units that would likely be clustered towards Magnolia Avenue. And again, that's provides a little bit of housing under the inclusionary standard. In regards to these developments, there's been issues raised regarding local control of affordable housing projects. And while the state laws have certainly sought to encourage cities to identify the zoning and recognize the need for streamlining development for housing projects that meet the zoning and comply with the general plan and housing element. The city still, these projects still need to comply with our general plan and zoning. This is a point where the city council, in identifying these sites, is making choices about where to identify that a developer or property owner may have an opportunity or entitlement to develop affordable housing. A city can deny a qualifying housing development if it's not consistent with the density of development identified in the housing element, and if the city has identified sufficient sites adequate to meet RHNA. However, if a city has not identified sufficient sites to meet RHNA and has received a certified housing element, it's possible just about any site could be identified for housing. We have with us both our city attorney and Ed Gertzmacher from Myers-Nave, who works with us on land use and CEQA issues, to answer any questions regarding this. It's certainly a complex set of laws, but we continue to emphasize that these sites, particularly sites such as Bon Air, are primarily for commercial development with residential above, and that's a controlling factor. Another issue that's been raised is the state density bonus law and how that affects our housing element, or how our housing element affects these sites relative to the state density bonus law. This is a set of regulations that apply to developments with 5 or more residential units. It includes density bonuses and concessions that must be made available on a sliding scale based on the number of units provided and the affordability level. The maximum mandatory density under state law is 35% if you have, for instance, say 20% of your units are available for low-income households. However, state law does permit a greater density bonus at the discretion of the city or the local agency, should that be chosen by the city to do so. The city can deny concessions or incentives to accommodate a density bonus under certain circumstances if it's not required or necessary to provide the affordable housing, or it would have a specific adverse impact upon public health, safety, or the environment or historic properties, and in no way mitigates the impacts without rendering the units unaffordable. And one thing I would like to show here is the distribution of housing sites. So in the blue, you can see through the center of this is Corte Madera Creek, and in the blue dots represent housing sites.
Just on your touchpad.
Sorry, I have
Just use the touchpad.
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right.
Show people where the dots are.
Okay, so the blue out here, you'll see, whoops, I think I passed that. Okay. All right, try not to touch that. So these are the sites that are approved under our ordinance for 2000 Larkspur Landing Circle, housing in that location. Development at Monahan Pacific, which is concluding. The Bon Air Center, which is a housing site identified. We have the housing out at McLaren property. A number of properties throughout North Magnolia that are part of that mixed-use commercial district. A variety of properties in the downtown. An approval for 284 Magnolia Avenue. excuse me, I'm losing this. This is the Discornia site, class sites 1 and 2, and in the blue here is the Rose Garden project, which is currently under construction and nearing completion. But I'd like to note that all the sites in red are opportunity sites on the inventory and do not have entitlements. So without having adequate sites for getting certification under HCD, the city, one option is to look for new sites or other opportunity sites for housing. And as we stated, it's challenging for Larkspur. There's very little land available. And the qualifiers for doing this are you must actually have a site that has a minimum of density of 20 units to the acre, a capacity for at least 16 units. And I think what's important here is that at least 50% of these units must be on a site that is for residential use only. So you cannot apply this simply on mixed-use commercial sites. We've identified other options in the staff report regarding Bon Air. As we've stated, the challenge is meeting our affordability level, particularly for the very low income categories. And as we approach these next steps, the process will be for us to bring the draft to the HCD, and if the city council wishes to make changes to the draft or any of these inventory sites, we would have to consider whether or not these are changes that we could simply bring forward to HCD as a proposed change and negotiate with them through time and report back to the council, or identify whether these are changes that would need additional environmental review, additional public review as well, if we're increasing development or housing opportunities on new sites or changing the zoning categories in any way. The other challenge with doing this is as we are proposing to lower the housing goal for Bon Air Shopping Center through the default density is this an approach that will be fully acceptable to HCD? And that's something we will have to be determined. The most direct approach to getting the housing element approved is simply to carry over the sites as proposed. They would have to accept those as proposed. We are looking at trying to do a change. If we reduce sites further or modify sites, and we've given a couple options. One is, of course, if you do decide to eliminate the Bon Air Shopping Center, we would have to identify at least several units throughout some of the other properties. And that may require their review to demonstrate that those can be, that we have adequate projections to account for that and for HCD to approve that. Another opportunity is to increase capacity on class sites 1 or 2. And again, this would require change to the CLASP or possibly to eliminate 1 or 2 of the Bon Air properties from the discussion. And this may require reduce the flexibility or the possibility for development on those properties for meeting that site as a housing opportunity site. So those are some options, but I think what we would need to do is get direction from the city council if there is a desired change to the opportunity sites, what that would have to be. Recognizing that if the priority is to assure a streamlined review through HCD, we may need to come back recognizing that there may be a need to keep either 90 units or keep the 40 units or make other adjustments to the housing element as we return. And one of the things, again, keeping in mind is any change that requires a change to the general plan or CLASP will probably invoke a greater environmental review requirement. Right now, We're proposing no change to the general plan, and we believe this is something that would be done under a very limited environmental review process, because basically we're carrying over the existing policies of the housing element and general plan. So we have a resolution prepared for moving this draft, approving this draft for submittal to HCD. But if there's other options, we're at the direction of the City Council.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Now the City Council has the opportunity to ask questions of staff. I'll start on my right with Vice Mayor Way.
Thank you, Neil, for that comprehensive report. I just want to put a couple things out in the open to clarify them right away. Our housing element does not rezone anything that already does not exist in our general plan now. We're not changing densities and increasing it from 20 to 40 or something like that. Is that correct?
That is correct. The current use designation and densities identified in the general plan have been in place for about 20 years. There have been some adjustments in 2004 for parking standards, but there's nothing in this housing element, this draft, that changes existing general plan or land use policy.
And we are not looking at a final planning approval or zoning entitlements for any specific project at all, right?
That's correct.
Right. And the Bon Air site had been at 90, and now it's to 40 in this existing plan?
We're reducing the housing goal to 40.
Okay. And it's already zoned for residential above commercial possibility?
That's correct.
So, okay. One other thing that's come up in lots of emails I have is 70 condominium units above a Lucky Market. So I understand we have sub-area 1, which has already been approved for 19, and sub-area 2, which is 28 in the clasp. That's not changed, and this is not going to change that either. That's correct?
That hasn't changed, and this would not change that. Those sub-areas were part of the prior housing element, so we're carrying them over, and there's no change to policy for those.
And there's no plan for, there's no developer who's permitted anything or put together any permit for 70 units above Lucky Market?
We have not received anything, no.
Okay. I'll have more, but I just needed that to get out right away.
Okay, good. Councilmember Haroff, would you like to go next or pass?
Whatever your preference.
Sure, we'll start on your side.
But if you like to get more, you want.
I'll have a few more, but I want to keep.
Well, good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone for showing up this evening. This is obviously an issue of significant concern to our community. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding this housing element. I don't know that we'll dispel that controversy tonight, but we'll certainly discuss the issues that it raises. It is a little bit of a deja vu here because we were kind of in a similar setting last year with the station area plan. And I think it's probably unfortunate that we have to kind of repeat the process a little bit tonight, but we do. So what I'd like to do is just ask a few questions, if I could, of staff. I'm sure we'll have some more conversation as we go through the evening. First thing I want to do is really acknowledge the great effort that Neil, you, and staff have put into the work that has resulted in the draft housing element. This is a long process that has gone through, you all have gone through. These are very arcane requirements of state law that you have to deal with in preparing these documents. They're very, very challenging to understand. I don't think I understand a fair number of them, although I've tried hard to as I've gone through the process. But I do think it's important for us, and we'll have others acknowledge the same thing this evening, the hard work that you and staff have gone through to prepare this document, particularly in light of the limitations that you have been given in conducting your work. I think one of the challenges that we have here, and you invited this actually in your closing remarks, is fleshing out maybe some of the policy considerations that we as a city council really need to provide you so that our community has options. Not just kind of doing business as usual, which is what many of our communities in Marin, including the county of Marin, have done recently as they've gone through their housing element process. So I think most of the concerns that I have and questions that I have really relate more to issues of policy than to the mechanics of what has been reflected in the housing element. But initially, I would like to ask kind of a mechanical issue, because you kind of raised this with, I think, slide number 4. This has to do with the HCD process. And I think it's important for us to kind of get some clarity about what we are doing when we are contemplating submitting the housing element to HCD. You have a discussion in page 5 of the draft element on the review that HCD is required to conduct. I just want to suggest to you that that discussion is maybe a little bit incomplete. And I'd like to refer you actually to section 65-585 E and F of the Government Code, which actually talks about what HCD does when it receives draft housing elements. I mean, your description is right to a point, I think. And we do go through the process. We prepare a draft that goes to HCD. HCD does do the review and that sort of thing. Well, what the outcome of that process is not entirely under the control of HCD. And I just wanted to make sure that this is an accurate understanding of what is at least possible in terms of our review process. 65-585E says, prior to the adoption of the draft element or draft amendment, the legislative body, which is us, shall consider the findings made by the department. Now, those would be findings that would be made by the department, by HCD, after the draft housing element is submitted to them, as I understand it. If the department's findings are not available within the time limit set by this section, then we have an opportunity to act without them. And here's actually the more important provision. And I just want to make sure that my understanding of what this provision allows is consistent with staff's understanding. If the department, this is subsection F, if the department finds that the draft element or draft amendment does not substantially comply with the requirements of this article, in other words, if HCD disapproves the draft housing element as not in compliance with the requirements of state law in their view, then a couple of different things could happen. The legislative body shall take one of the following actions. The first of those actions is change the draft element or draft amendment to substantially comply with the requirements of this article. In other words, go along with whatever HCD is doing in terms of its disapproval determination. Or the legislative body, which is the city council, can adopt the draft element or draft amendment without any changes. The legislative body shall include in its resolution of adoption written findings which explain the reasons the legislative body believes that the draft element or draft amendment substantially complies with the requirements of this article, despite the findings of the department. So in other words, as I understand the requirements of state law, is that even if HCD kicks back our draft housing element, outlining reasons why it believes the draft element does not comply with requirements of state law, we still have an opportunity essentially to override that determination, provided that we make appropriate findings that it's consistent with the needs and wants of our local community. Is that a fair understanding?
It's my understanding that, yes, we can certify our own housing element and make findings to that effect.
Okay, I just want to get that clear.
Say that. But
Our city attorney wants to say something?
I just want to clarify that there is a but that goes with that. The city council can self-certify. The city council can self-certify the housing element, but the risks that Neil posted on one of the early slides, all of those go with a self-certified housing element.
I understand.
Okay, I know you understand that, but I want to make sure that that's clear for everybody who's who's following this
Yeah,
discussion.
I understand that that's a fair clarification because although quite frankly, even if HCD did certify it, there are opportunities for someone who believes that still that the housing element does not comply with the requirements of state law could bring an action. It's just a question of, what's the burden of proof and, who's got a presumption of validity and things of that sort. But the clarity that I want to make sure people do understand is that there is a mechanism under state law to allow City Council to self-certify whatever housing element that they choose to adopt, provided that they make appropriate findings, which we potentially could do. So that's the first question. The second issue, and again, this is kind of a mechanics issue, has to do with the requirements for public participation in this process. And I think, as you know from conversations we've had in the past, one of my biggest concerns as we've gone through the process with the housing element, and as we went through the process with the station area plan, is to make sure that there is a fully effective process for public participation, not just a process that allows the public to receive what it is that we have developed for them, but to actually have the public engage in the process in a way that comments are received, we respond to those comments, we make revisions to documents based upon public input and things of that sort. Now, I understand that under state law, the only, under the government code provisions, the only real requirement for public participation is that the city makes a diligent effort to achieve public participation. And I think that's happened. I mean, you all conducted a workshop last fall. I attended that. We had the Planning Commission hearing a month or so ago, which I also attended. So we've made a diligent effort. But it's important to note that under the government code provisions that are applicable here, there aren't requirements to conduct the kind of full public input process that I am kind of used to when I deal with, for example, CEQA review, where there's actually a specified period of time when a document is put out into the public domain, opportunities are provided to the public to submit written comments, maybe even have a hearing where verbal comments are received, and then there's an obligation on the part of the decision makers, the city, to actually respond to those public comments in a credible and responsive way. And I know that as a matter of practice, many communities around the state of California, and including the county, did go through a CEQA process when they have done updates for their housing element. And we can quibble about whether, for example, in the county's case, those procedures were valid, but they actually did go through a process. They had a supplemental EIR that they approved. They did amendments to that. They did go through a process. This last iteration, they didn't quite do that, but in prior iterations with their housing element, they actually did do a CEQA process. So my question is, what was the thought process in this case, or what is the thought process in this case for doing CEQA review in connection with our housing element update?
Well, our thought process is that essentially by doing this streamlined process and carrying over existing sites, number one, formulating that in fact is the strategy for going forward towards a final adoption, that we would conduct our CEQA analysis based on the draft that's determined by the City Council, and that in our current process, we're not proposing significant changes to policy or new changes to general plan or land use designations. So the anticipation is that the CEQA review would be limited if this is the draft that is brought forward. We would prepare an addendum based on the past environmental review for the prior housing element and under general plan, but because we're not creating new potential impacts through this document. The anticipation, our strategy was really to make sure we know the document we're working with, we know the policies we're working with, and then move forward with a CEQA review based on that document.
So
Many cities are taking that approach with the
Right.
with the streamlined process.
So which environmental review document are we talking about that was done in the past for the housing element?
Well, there was a 2004 negative declaration, and then there was an addendum to that negative declaration with the 2010 update.
Okay, so would it be your intention to do an addendum?
Possibly. Right.
Okay, and the addendum process, which is what the county did with respect to their last housing element update, does not contemplate under CEQA the kind of public comment and response process that I described a moment ago, as my understanding. In fact, the county made kind of a deal about that and told the public that they weren't going to contemplate that. So I just want to get clarification on what you envision in terms of that to allow us to maybe provide you with direction when you do go through whatever CEQA process will be required for purposes of adopting whatever final housing element we go through.
Okay.
Because I think it's important. And I think it's important for the public to understand that CEQA is in fact relevant in this context, even though it's not really discussed in the housing element, except with respect to project-specific review. It is an important part of the process, and we will need to go through it as we go through whatever approval process we have to adopt this housing element. Can I keep going?
Sure. You can move it along a little quicker because we have a lot of other questions from other council members.
Mr. Mayor, may I make a
Yeah.
suggestion, please? In my opinion, any projection of decisions by other jurisdictional agencies on this council tonight is a mistake. Comparing us to the county, comparing us to anybody else, I think is a mistake. Because I don't think it does credit to the good stewardship that this council and previous councils have made with respect to managing change in our community. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, please proceed.
I'll keep some of my questions more abbreviated. I would like to talk a little bit or ask a couple questions about the listing of housing opportunity sites on page 47. Before I get to that, though, I do want to just respond briefly to what Councilmember Hilmer did said. I'm not proposing to make any comparisons between what is being done by this city and by this city council with other jurisdictions. I do think it's fair and relevant to be mindful of what is done by other jurisdictions so that we don't make the same mistakes that they may have made. So I think that is actually a fair reason to keep that in mind.
Okay. Let's save all this for council member deliberations after we get
That's fair
public
enough.
comments.
On page 47, there's a chart, Housing Opportunity Sites Inventory Summary. And there are the housing opportunity sites that were described during the presentation. And this is just actually kind of a technical question. There's a column in the middle of the page that discusses realistic capacity for individual sites.
It's not in there.
It's not on the slides. It's in the document itself. And some of those realistic capacity numbers have an asterisk associated with them. And the asterisk is to a footnote on page 48. And the footnote on page 48 says realistic development capacity on these sites, in other words, the sites with the asterisks, is lower than the maximum capacity Then please see site-specific narratives immediately following on page 50 for the city's methodology for assigning realistic development capacity. For those sites with the asterisks, can you just explain the difference between realistic capacity and maximum capacity?
I think the identification of maximum capacity was particularly for like a number of the sites where you have miscellaneous properties all grouped together. When you add up all the acreage of all those various properties, you can extrapolate that to a larger number. But the realistic capacity is reflecting the fact that these are sort of three different factors. One is many of these are mixed miscellaneous sites that some are very small in area. They're all mixed use. They're mostly developed to some degree. And based on past performance of creating or achieving units within some of these areas in the downtown or North Magnolia, the identified realistic capacity is a projection of that development potential.
Okay, so just, and I'm gonna pass this on to other members of the council because I don't want to hog up too much time here.
And I should just clear, over
Yeah.
the next eight-year period, for the 8-year period.
Okay.
And again, by carrying over these sites, we're essentially not changing the language or the numbers that were assigned prior to these properties. So there's been little change to most of these. So those numbers are carrying over what was previously accepted by HCD.
Okay. So for those sites that have a number with an asterisk on it, can you tell us what the maximum capacity would be? And just for example, the maximum capacity for Bon Air?
If you were to build it out to 21 units to the acre, I'm trying to remember, that's if it was only residential. I believe it was about 350 units.
Can you clarify, Councilmember Hoff, were you talking about if this was virgin land? I'm a little confused.
I just
by the
want to,
question.
I just want to understand what were the numbers that were being compared when the asterisk was placed on this number. I don't know what the maximum capacity means, so I'm trying to get an understanding what you had in mind when you made that comparison.
Well, what the numbers we were generating was what we were considering the realistic capacity. So the question is, what is the maximum capacity of those sites if you were to build out to the theoretical 21 dwelling units to the acre? Is that the question?
We can phrase it that way, sure.
Okay, I'll get you that number.
Okay, and I'm just looking as an example for the one for Bon Air, and that would be fine.
Yeah.
I'd like a recess if that's the question, because I'm not sure that's an appropriate. I'm not sure Mr. Tops is going to answer the question you're asking. And I'm concerned about confusing the audience about the information. So if we're going to calculate this number, I think we need time to understand the question a little better. It's not it's not fair to
Okay,
the
I'm
audience
not,
to suggest
I'm not,
that
I'm not
this is
trying to put
virgin
anybody,
land.
not trying to put anybody on the spot here, and if it's not an easy number to discuss right now, that's fine. Again, I'm just trying to get an understanding, because there's a reference to a maximum capacity and a reference to
Well, no,
a
there's
realistic capacity.
There's a reference to a maximum density. It's very different than a maximum capacity.
There's a reference to maximum capacity in the footnote.
Okay, well, and I think part of that question might be maximum capacity. What we're identifying as a realistic capacity is an anticipated goal of housing units in our inventory. A maximum capacity for sites that, in the case of Bon Air, because you have other policies that don't apply to the downtown, your realistic capacity or your maximum capacity is much more limited by your actual building footprints. So part of the question has been exactly how many units could you build over commercial on those properties? And that's very hard to say because you don't have an exact number. It doesn't translate the same thing as a 21 units to the acre density. You have building footprint, you have height limits, and you have unit sizes. So essentially it translates to more of a form-based condition because it's mixed use.
Okay. Here's the reason I was asking the question.
And if you do look on page 57, we've identified some estimated capacities for Bon Air.
Right.
Based on those footprints. And again, because of that condition of that site, that's really an estimated capacity.
Right, and that's on the chart that's on page 57?
Well, that's actually, if you go to page, on the chart on 57, right.
So
And those are numbers that were carried over from the prior housing element.
Okay, so if you use the estimated unit capacity, that adds up to about 109 or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like 102.
102? Okay, so my question is, with respect to, and I don't want to focus necessarily on Bon Air, but just generally, if we were to be using the maximum capacity as depicted, for example, in the Bon Air case, as described in that chart, if we did that for all of the sites, would that create opportunities to make adjustments in the mix of opportunity sites that we include within our draft housing element and still meet our RENA numbers?
Could you just phrase that one more time?
So for example, if we use the maximum capacity for sites other than, and again, I'm only using Bon Air here as an example, I don't want to focus
Right.
on it unnecessarily. But if we use the maximum capacity numbers that you all had in mind in writing the draft element, would we be able to, for example, achieve our RENA allocation numbers with sites that might exclude Bon Air?
Yeah, I see where you're going. I think the issue, and as we had discussed it in the staff report, is if we were to identify a higher number of anticipated or realistic capacity relative to sort of this over the 8-year period for development of units and target those goals, that would be a change to those housing sites that would be subject to review and consideration by HCD. And I'm not saying it would be outright rejected, but it would bring those sites under consideration. And the question of, are you in the position of actually performing the development of those sites to meet our RENA over the planning cycle? So those sites would then come into play in a way that they do not now by carrying over and based on our performance.
But it would provide us with more options in terms of our selection of sites for inclusion in the housing element if we calculated our capacity to comply with our allocated RENA numbers by reference to those maximum capacity numbers. Is
It's
that correct?
possible.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
May I assume in your question, Councilmember Haroff, that you're assuming CEQA provisions notwithstanding?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Well, you're not taking the environmental review if these numbers were to be shifted around. It also shifts the issues regarding CEQA around too.
Well, I'm certainly not suggesting that doing that would be CEQA neutral. I mean, if that's your question. I mean, there may well be CEQA review implications by doing that, which is
Just
one
wanted
of the
that to
reasons.
be understood in your
Which is
question.
one of the reasons I was asking about the CEQA review process earlier, because that may be fine.
It also may not be fine.
Well, it all depends on your perspective. I have some additional questions, but I'm going to follow the lead of Councilmember Way and reserve and let others have the podium.
Right, Councilmember Morrison?
Nice to see some familiar faces out there. In fact, I wish our council chamber looked like this for every council meeting we had. welcome, come back anytime. My question to you, Neil, is there is a traffic cap limit on the Bon Air, which I know you discussed, but I just want to,
Yes.
for foot traffic and for,
Well, there's a vehicle cap limit for Bon Air.
that's correct.
And in fact, we recently had some studies and reestablished what their actual vehicle trip generation is for the site. So we have some pretty identified numbers for what their trip generation is, what their mix of uses is.
Great,
Yes.
thank you. So if one is going to develop any housing on top of Bon Air, it needs to be senior housing or extremely low income or low income.
Yeah, it has to, however many units you would construct, at least half of those have to be committed to senior or
Half would be
Or
20,
affordable.
or would it, could we designate it to be 40?
well, the numbers identified reflect simply a unit goal of 40 units, with the assumption that they would be both affordable to low or very low income.
Great, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the public, so I'm just going to let Dan ask his questions, and then I'll get back. Thank you, Neil.
My question is really one, and it has to do with how the proposed update to the housing element protects our local control over decisions regarding development projects. And this might be best addressed to the city attorney. Recognizing that this is a reduction in the number of units we're proposing from the 2010 housing element. Our current general plan policies, and this is the question, do our current general plan policies, including policy C of the transportation element, regarding limiting added trips to Sir Francis Drake, with the exception recognized that was identified earlier for senior or housing for disabled, and the land use designations with a maximum of 21 units to the acre. In addition to our development standards and design review process, does this still protect our established local control over our ability to approve development projects within the current general plan policies effectively?
I'm going to ultimately turn this over to my colleague Ed Gritzmacher here, since he specializes in this area and litigates these issues and can provide you with a more comprehensive response.
The reason I'm asking this is I want it to be clearly understood that regardless of what's presented in the updated housing element, we still have the ability to say no to development projects when they do not match up or are inconsistent with our general plan policies.
Generally, yes. There's a more detailed answer to that, which is why I think it would be useful to have Ed expand on it. But the mere approval of the housing element, even as proposed for City Council to approve to submit to HCD, if HCD approved that and it was ultimately finalized, doesn't give up City Council's ultimate control over land use development in the city. There's a more nuanced answer than that, so I'm going to ask Ed to expand on that.
Yeah, there's a more nuanced answer. And the answer is it depends. It's a great lawyer answer. The affordable housing requirements under state law and the density bonus requirements under state law do make it difficult for local agencies to restrict affordable housing that's planned for in their housing element. So there are some real world impacts by approving housing elements and saying these are our sites for affordable housing. If you have designated a site as affordable housing and you designated the density on the general plan and a project comes in that meets both the general plan and the density goals, there are some very significant restrictions on the city's ability to deny that project or even to impose conditions on that project that would affect the density.
Let me just ask an illustrative question within that context. For example, at the Bon Air Center, we have policy C of our transportation element. We've also suggested that there would be a maximum of 40 units based on a maximum of 21 to the acre for a portion or spread out over that property. Those recommendations, it would be expected that anything coming forward at a project level would, and those assumptions are really within the framework of our general plan policies right now. So what we would be looking at is a project that would be within our current general plan policies at a maximum of 20 units to the acre and limited by policy C of our transportation element.
That's correct. One of the things you can deny a otherwise qualifying affordable housing development on the basis of is the fact that you've already met your RHNA goals. And so if your goals say you want 40 units at this site and that's all you need to meet your numbers, and someone comes in with 100 units or 150 units, you can say, no, we only need 40 units to meet our goals.
Thank you.
Ed, can you also just touch briefly on the role of design review in that decision-making process?
Sure. Again, you still have design review. You can't use design review as a way to reduce density. That's already been approved for in the general plan. So you can't say, you're in compliance with our general plan density requirements. It's a 40-unit acre or 40 units at Bon Air, for the example we're using, but we don't like it because it's too bulky or something like that. You have to. You can't use design review as a way of reducing density.
But what's being proposed in the housing element is consistent with other projects we've reviewed and approved in our city to date. And what's being proposed in the housing element, for example, is not anything that would lead us to a project like what happened along Tamil Vista. It would be more like the development envelopes that are existing in our own downtown.
Right. You wouldn't get an 8-story development or something like
No,
that.
so-
No. So the legal definition is you can't use design review to reduce the density. So 40 units on the Bon Air site, if that's what you're having, and you can't use design review in a way that would make it financially infeasible for the affordable housing development to go forward. So, I don't know if you wanted gold-plated windows or something like
Well,
that.
what I'm saying is the update to the housing element is crafted within the framework of our existing general plan policies, which have worked well so far. And it doesn't take us into another universe of high-density development as most people are feared.
No, again, you're limited to your RHNA numbers and the density that's in your general plan.
So we would be proposing, nothing is being proposed here that's different than anything that's already happening in Larkspur.
Right. The numbers, in fact, at Bon Air, my understanding is they're reduced from what's currently
Correct.
offered in the general plan and has been for, 20 years, Neil? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Did you say reduce?
That's my understanding is that currently it's 90 units. Is that right? I'll let Neil go into the specifics. Yeah. Yeah. Reduced, yes.
25 years. It's 1990. Okay. Councilmember Wade, did you have any other questions?
I'm going to defer so that we can hear from the public.
Yeah, that's what I would like to do too. I think some of my more important questions can be stated as comments later or brought back up if they don't get answered during the public comment period. So this is a public comment period. I want to create kind of a, in order of, I'll just call it hierarchy because I want to get the, let's just say the higher level comments out first. I didn't see anybody in the room representing a local municipality or the county or anything. But if there is and they have comments they'd like to make, I'd like to take those first. Okay. Seeing none, what I'm going to do here is, can I just get a rough show of hands of how many people would like to address the council? Okay, that's not too bad. If it was going to be like 75 and I do simple math on, 3 minutes each, we're going to be here till after 10 o'clock. So
I'm happy just to show support for it. I don't need to speak. If that would help, are there other people like that?
yeah, and what I was going to explain is that some people may have a very detailed comment and you get to the point where you just say, oh, I agree with so-and-so, I agree with that speaker on this issue, that'll help move it through a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is we're actually going to use the timer tonight so that we can kind of monitor the flow of people who are making comments. And I'm going to set it for 2.5 minutes for each person. Actually, well, usually we give 3 minutes. I'm gonna stick with the 3 minutes unless it looks like we're running way behind. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll start with whoever would like to go first, and we'll just take show of hands if you would line up just behind the podium. That would be good. And what we'll do is if you don't feel comfortable making a public comment and you decide you want to submit it in writing, those comments will be equally reviewed by the council and will go into the public record as well. So.
Last night at Court There's a turn that they pivoted, so the person would speak, and it made a better vibe, but it's up to you.
Well, the comments are really to the council and not to the public, so we're going to keep it the way it is. And at 30 seconds, you'll get a yellow light, and at 3 minutes, you will
Where's
get
the light?
right up here in front of me.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Okay, so please state your name and your address.
I can't tell if the mic is working.
It's working.
Okay, since I'm
So
shorter
please,
than most of the speakers. Okay.
Yeah, please
You
state
can
your
start
name
now.
please state your name and your address of the city you're from, please.
Beverly Russell, 30 Coeur de Loyola, Green Bay.
Thank you.
I was going to go over all of the traffic and parking problems that we anticipate from the lack of resolution to the 101 Sir Francis Drake mess and, of course, the WinCup project. But you're already working on that, and I think that would be great if we could institute a moratorium like Corte Madera has done to see what the effects of the WinCup experiment are before we go on to put Bonaire, which is just over the city line, into the plan. I would also like to comment on the larger legal context. Governor Brown recently declared a drought emergency in the state. Larkspur's housing element update is Larkspur's response to the RHNA requirement imposed by state and regional agencies. We've gone over that. Water resources have not been part of the calculus when RHNA allocations are developed. However, state law changes. In fact, the recent Sustainable Communities strategy that coordinates housing and transportation policy is only a few years old. It defies common sense that sustainable communities should not consider water resource constraints. We should not be surprised if state laws are enacted that modify the RHNA allocation process. The housing element update should address this rapidly evolving problem, anticipating that state law may eventually require local governments to address water resources in their housing planning policies. And I would really advocate that our local city council take the lead on explicitly addressing these constraints. We don't know the effect of the large project in Corte Madera. We don't know the effect of various new projects that have been accepted and not yet built out. We don't know the effects of Governor Brown's plans to deal with the drought. I think it's totally premature to go with the housing element amendment that you've proposed.
Okay, thank you. Right, yeah, just please state your name and your address, please.
My name is Debbie Levy. My address is 29 Millard Road in Larkspur. I've lived here for over 30 years. I want to thank the council and the staff. And I want to speak in favor of the housing element as it stands. I think that for the most part, affordable housing in our area can help to reduce some of our traffic concerns even though a lot of people believe that it will increase them. But by being able to have people that work here, live here, I think that it goes a long way in cutting down traffic. I also believe in diversity and being able to have people able to move here like my husband and I did 30 years ago. I don't think we'd be able to afford to move here in this day and age at the age that we did. So I thank you, and I hope that this passes or gets adopted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Dwayne Price, Elm Avenue in Larkspur. I support this housing element for two reasons. First, it's the right thing to do. For the second reason, consider, when I arrived in the Bay Area as a young man, the population of Marin County was about 200,000. It is now about 250,000. In that same time period, the population of the Bay Area more than doubled to 7.5 million. Do the math. We are outnumbered 30 to 1. If we don't step up to the plate and do our fair share, and we are already way behind, those other 30x number of people are likely to sashay into here and say, sorry folks, but we are taking over the planning and zoning authority along the 101 corridor. Lovely. I want also to comment on the old bugaboo, traffic, specifically as it relates to the Bon Air property. If that site is developed for residential, its new residents will not have bunches of gardeners driving in every week, nor will they have maids driving in, or nannies, or pool guys. They will not have fleets of contractors, trucks coming in and out every few years to overhaul a bathroom or kitchen or paint a hallway. If these residents need groceries, they're not likely to pile into a huge SUV and drive a couple of miles. Nope, they'll walk downstairs, pick up their groceries, and walk back. And if any of these folks work in the city, they will not be joining that 10-mile parade down St. Francis Drake Boulevard to reach 101 or the ferry terminal because they're already there. I strongly urge you to approve this amendment to the housing element. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm John Reynolds. I'm a resident of Marin County. Currently, I live in the Canal in San Rafael. I did live in the attic at San Francisco Theological Seminary. When I first came here, I lived in a grandmother unit at San Francisco Boulevard in San Anselmo. But I worked in Alameda County as a social worker, $40,000 a year. And that's a job I could find over in Alameda County. Couldn't find one here. So I looked for a place to buy a condo. Lanham Village was a possibility. The canal was a possibility. I finally decided the canal. That was what I could afford. I associate myself with people that don't work here but don't live here. I associate myself with disabled people and senior citizens. I associate myself with social workers, teachers, fire police, retail office clerks and office clerks and in-home care workers and gardeners that need to have a place that they can live here. And I think places like Drake's Way was a good example. I appreciate that. I was at a meeting of the Planning Commission at Larkspur several years ago, and they were talking about Bon Air, over at Bon Air. That sounded to me like a good possibility for people that don't have to travel a long ways and could participate in the community in a diverse kind of way, add to the richness of the community. So I appreciate your housing element that you've already said yes to with the Planning Commission, and would like you to adopt it tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you might want to pull that up a little bit.
You get the impression.
You get the creative
Great.
award.
Mayor Chu, council members, my name is Dave Curry.
Thank you.
I am a resident of your twin city, Corte Madera. I can't afford it here. And I support what Debbie Levy said, and I also support the gentleman behind her, especially in terms of the quieting aspect of providing housing for people who work here. I'm a member of the Friends of Smart as well as COM, although I'm not speaking on their behalf. I don't think they have approved positions particularly on this, but we are interested in maintaining the livability of Marin. And the housing element here is a good start. There are some lacks to it. One thing Debbie did not mention was that she spent a long time as executive director of Lifehouse, serving people with developmental disabilities. And I happen to be on the board of another organization that does that. And there is a lack in this current housing element about the assessment of needs. If you need to get the memo site, it was sent out in 2012 by Glenn Campora of HCD, referring to the data required to assess the need for people with developmental disabilities in every jurisdiction. Furthermore, I think this hand-waving over CEQA is really a distraction. It does fall within the general plan, and I think the housing element is as much about building a better built environment as it is about assessing the needs of the community. And I think if you were to take a broad look at the needs of the community, you would find that the complexion of the workers in Larkspur has changed. And there's much greater need for housing for lower income workers than there has ever been. That's the fastest growing segment of employment in Marin in general, and I am sure in Larkspur in particular. So I think rather than hand-waving around the difficulties of getting the zoning through, it would be much better to look at the needs and to meet them as representatives of the people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
In case you forgot.
Thank you. Peter Orth from the neighbor to the south. Both Corte Madera and Larkspur share a lot of things. I was very pleased to hear that you're actually meeting with the Corte Madera folks to work on things that affect us all. I live towards the southern end of Corte Madera. And I think there's something that was kind of behind what was being talked about here by your council and your planning director. And that is that we really don't have a situation, I think, where things are static. And to say that something was done and therefore we're not changing it, therefore we really don't have to look at it, I think is a mistake. It doesn't have to be necessarily a CEQA review, but I think traffic is already caught up, and traffic is not just traffic. Traffic is health and safety. Marin General Hospital is inaccessible during long periods of the day. First responders can't get places, not only here in Larkspur, but in Corte Madera and in parts of San Rafael. And I think those are the things that need to be looked at. Senior housing, low-income housing, people here are advocating that. I'm an advocate for that. I'm a senior. I'm probably not going to move into senior housing, but at some point I might need to. It would have been good for some other members of my family. I think those are great. But in accepting RENA numbers and accepting that as kind of a given, I think you look at that and no one mentions the fact that there are just market rate houses in there. And that's what happened with WinCup. Most of those are market rate, and they're huge. And I think that's the problem with just accepting. We won't really look at what we're doing. It's going to meet the state's requirements. Look at what you're doing. Senior housing, put in the right places, great idea, plan for that. But to take everybody's time, effort, and energy and tax dollars to plan for affordable housing is good. But to plan for market rate housing, it seems like an oxymoron. The things that the first speaker mentioned, we do have resource issues that have caught up with us. Traffic has caught up with us. Anyone can go out to Sir Francis Drake and say, we'll do a study and it'll be all right. It's just, I mean, it's silly. It just backs up on the freeway. Metering lights aren't going to do it. Down in the southern part of Corte Madera, we're getting the overflow already from the backups. It comes down Magnolia, where you're planning some of the stuff there. That's all going to go through Corte Madera, and they're going to come off, and they're going to go down Casa Buena, which is a country road, and they're going to load that. And that's a problem. There's no infrastructure for this stuff. So you got to look at it it's what's caught up with this, not what used to be the okay. And I think that's the point of not accepting a number that was developed in a different place and just kind of cut up and sent down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Martha Copeland.
Okay, can you pull your mic down a little so that it gets picked
Is this
up?
good?
Thank you. Yes.
I'm Martha Copeland. I live in Greenbrae. I've lived in this county for 7 decades. The reason that the east part of Bonaire Center was not built out was because it flooded year after year after year. Now, we've had several years of drought, and we forget that. But I find it senseless that when we're talking about rising ocean levels and an area that floods, that we're talking about a big addition. In addition, you've got to realize the schools are at capacity right now. For those of us who were raised by our grandmothers, I am sure that there will be seniors raising kids in that Bonaire unit. I think you've not looked at everything that should be considered. And I certainly agree with the first speaker who talked about the amount of water and water resources as well as the sewer capacity that we have that nobody's thought of. I think this whole Bonaire development is, to say that it won't affect, that it is absolutely necessary, you're forgetting everything else that it impacts. The state says it doesn't matter about traffic. Yeah, it doesn't matter about traffic. The carbon footprint of every car slowed down on Sir Francis Drake matters. And there's some sort of implication that seniors don't drive. I drive, and my 94-year-old aunt just renewed her driver's license with a perfect driver's record. We drive. Thank you.
Thank you.
David from Larkspur. Yeah, so most people are really worried about the potential of, what we're exposed to in terms of like another wing cup. Now, we hear the trust us, but we still don't have a max number on the Bonaire. I mean, we've heard everything from 40 to 365 or whatnot. But even if it was 40, I mean, there's zero room there. I mean, the parking lot, the traffic, I mean, it's not tenable. Communities like Ross do this smart. They have the Marin Art and Garden Center, right? That gem of our community. They put it as their well, where it rolls off every cycle. This is completely legal. This is what a safe parcel is. This is how you safely bury your paper quota, which doesn't prevent you from making legitimate housing deals. But it gets the state out. It prevents these quotas from becoming the impetus for Wing Cup. So I would encourage to remove all the extra buffer. We only have 37 units in our remaining quota. There's no reason to expose Bonaire, to expose Lucky Market, and other big sites. We need to spread this out, not make any big targets for developers. We can't be naive. It's going to happen. We already know the HCD in this is our hero. They were the one that found that through the audit that ABAG guy that was embezzling from the city. So I think they're gonna see we filled our quota. We're all good. There's no reason to buffer. There's no basis in the statute, the law for a buffer. This is people are concerned that there's unusual attachment from certain council to be deal maker in these very profitable $100 million land deals, and this is inappropriate. We need to negotiate these in daylight. We can't do this under the fake guise, the auspices of affordable housing, because we all know none of us could afford our homes anymore. Because this is an effect of monetary policy, right? The bubbles is particularly in real estate. So this supply side or trickle down scam from the state is meaningless. It will not materially affect pricing. This idea that you can just build more. So I think we need to be honest with ourselves and really protect our community, protect the gems, our parcels in our community, and not expose ourselves with fast tracking language, which it's unacceptable that if it just reaches some minimum token level of affordability that it won't receive traffic studies. This is unacceptable. We can't afford this luxury on Magnolia or Bonaire. So I wish we could just slim it down, no buffer.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Chu and council members, I'm Judy Bensaka of the League of Women Voters of Marin County. I chair the League's Transportation, Land Use, and Housing Committee, and I am speaking tonight on behalf of the League. The League commends the Planning Commission's unanimous vote on January 27th to adopt the goals, policies, and programs in the draft Larkspur housing element. We're pleased that the plan includes the possibility of 8 new downtown apartments above existing stores and on vacant lots, and a strong emphasis on second units. Affordable housing for families, workers, and seniors is what we're concerned about. As we all know, the need for such housing continues to grow throughout Marin, and every jurisdiction needs to do its part, including Larkspur, which already has 2 of Marin's most attractive affordable housing developments, Edgewater Place and Drake's Way. Larkspur is an ideal location for such housing, with its central location near transportation, shopping centers, schools, and such essential job centers as the College of Marin, Marin General Hospital, and nearby medical offices. Housing in such areas can reduce the use of cars by residents and employees and encourage the development of the types of mass transit that Marin has a growing need for to transport seniors, students, workers, and shoppers. One site that is particularly suitable for such housing is Bon Air. The League notes that other Marin shopping centers...
Hey, please, don't do that. Let's be respectful of all the speakers.
We believe this is an ideal location, as are other shopping centers in Marin, for such housing as affordable housing, just as they are for market rate housing that now exists nearby. Building affordable homes above retail simply makes sense. Less traffic and more buyers for the center's shops and services, and more sales taxes for Larkspur. Another issue that needs to be clarified is that it's Larkspur City Council, not the state or ABAG, that has control over the location, size, and density and design of new developments. We expect that Larkspur will continue to have an honest, open debate on these issues. The astounding rise in rents in Marin, at 12% in the past year alone, has affected Larkspur. It needs to keep its current citizenry housed in the places they've called home over the years, as well as welcome new residents who deserve a chance to live in such an ideal community. The draft housing element has its roots in Larkspur's 1999 housing element and represents the community's best effort to find the best locations for new housing for both current and potential residents. The League asks the City Council to adopt the draft housing element before you tonight and follow your tradition of building quality, affordable housing in Larkspur. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bob Pendoli. I live in San Rafael. I'm speaking tonight for the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative. We are a group of housing and environmental advocates who support environmentally friendly, affordable housing. We strongly urge you to forward this housing element to HCD. The most obvious need for affordable housing in Larkspur is for seniors. 44% of your seniors are renters, and the majority of those are paying more than they can afford for housing. These folks are on limited incomes, and they have no potential for reemployment. The Planning Commission considered requests to delete Bon Air Shopping Center from the list of housing opportunity sites and concluded that it should be retained. We concur, and we strongly recommend that you keep Bon Air in your housing element. Also, many speakers have testified in favor of junior second units as a viable program for providing housing opportunity. We concur. We urge you to include junior second units in your housing programs. We recognize that they aren't the solution to the housing problem, but nevertheless they contribute and they'll help. The decision to adopt this housing element should be an easy one, frankly. The updated element doesn't include any substantial changes from the goals, policies, or programs that you adopted back in 2010. No properties are proposed for rezoning, and the sites that have been designated in this housing element have been so designated for upwards of 20 years and more. In conclusion, you have a long tradition of approving excellent affordable housing projects. We urge you to continue this enviable record. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Hi, good evening.
Good evening. My name is Wendy Callens. I'm speaking on behalf of Coalition for a Livable Marin. And I want to start out with just a little personal story. I have a friend She's a Larkspur resident. She lives in the Woodlark Apartments, or I should say, maybe for a few more months, she will be living in the Woodlark Apartments. I don't know how many people are aware that this particular lovely apartment building was sold, and the new owners decided they wanted to jack up the rents. So they're going in and they're doing mild remodels on the apartments in the process. A very strong community of people who really enjoyed living together have now been thrown out of their homes. Most of them have left now. Some people, like my friend, were able to stay a little longer, but in another couple of months, she's going to have to leave. She's had many, many months to try to find another place to live, to no avail. She's gainfully employed, and she's a responsible member of the community, and she's leaving Marin because she can't find a place to stay. Here are some other shocking numbers about Marin's young people from the U.S. Census. Since 2000, incomes have declined by almost a quarter, and the poverty rate has gone up by a third. It's not surprising 1 in 3 still live with their parents and less than 5% on their own. It is the desire of many young people today to live in mixed-use neighborhoods that is near transit, that is walkable and bikeable. The county is slowly changing, and it is slowly growing, and I do mean slowly. The point is to find ways to accommodate the inevitable growth without worsening these problems, and in fact to create better neighborhoods in the process. Placing housing at Bonaire or within the downtown above stores is a good reuse of existing resources and is much better than taking green fields that are now undeveloped and developing on those. I think the biggest urban myth is that the Wind Cup development is somehow the model and that everything is going to look like Wind Cup. Wind Cup is neither the model for high-density development, nor do I consider it new urbanism. It's not as though we don't have numerous examples that are all over Marin, in particular right around the Bonaire Shopping Center, that show what density can actually look like. Because what is density really? It's apartments. And apartments don't sound as quite as evil. Again, here are some pictures of apartments that already exist in Marin, and these do not look so scary. Nothing that is in the housing element is out of scale with other apartment buildings and condos that are already in Marin. Not everyone can live in Marin, but at least we can do is make sure that we keep a balance so that we don't turn into yet another gated community for the very wealthy. Marin has been asked to absorb 1% of the projected growth for the Bay Area. And state law asks us to show that we can accommodate this growth. Do we want to close our borders and say you can work here, but you can't live here? You can grow up here, but then go somewhere else? And seniors, you'll just have to give up the home and friends that you've known all your lives and live somewhere else. This is not who we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Peter Hubbold, Larkspur.
Yeah, you can raise the mic a little bit.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the council for allowing me to speak, and I especially want to thank Councilman Arhoff on his line of questioning. I really appreciate, I don't think it's ever been explained to the residents what exactly it means if we don't have a housing element that meets these RN numbers, so I really appreciate that questioning. My 2 comments are this. One, I really want to understand what the developer fees are for the school impact. My understanding that Wind Cup produced $500,000 in fees for the schools. I think if that number is accurate, it's just astronomically low, given that we just passed the $30 million bond measure. The second thing is I do think second units and junior units provide a less impactful traffic impact for our environment and make it a much more livable place. So I really would encourage making second junior units and second units in homes much more readily available for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gail Bloom, and I live at 10 Latterman Lane, which is in Greenbrae, but also Larkspur. And my feelings about the general plan amendment, the housing element, is that in particular for the Bonaire property, I moved to Greenbrae because of Bonaire specifically, and I like it. And I would hate to see a housing element that encouraged and facilitated the redevelopment of the shopping center for only 40 units. There's a lot of commerce, there's a lot of jobs there, and I think it's really important that we facilitate and maintain those jobs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Larson. I live in Corte Madera. I think this discussion is so depressing. If we all took a step back and pretended that this exact same dialogue was going on in Indonesia or Africa or Latin America, you've had your chance,
Yeah,
so let me
please
just continue.
keep your comments to yourself.
Right, it isn't. But when you say it isn't, that assumes that what we had in Marin was less fantastic than what they have in other parts of the world. I was born here, lived through amazing times here, music, whatnot, left, came back, and things have changed. My point being is that if we all moved here because we love Marin, why are we going through this charade to do everything possible, it seems, to change the area? If big corporations, developers, Wall Street were going into Latin America, Africa, or Asia, the same people here that are for big developments would be against the big developments. So let's take a step back, realize why we live in Marin. It's not for the high density. If you want high density, anybody's free to move to Emeryville or Millbrae or any place else along 101. Those aren't closed cities. Another issue I have is with the gentleman that spoke earlier. In the name of transparency, I'm happy to call it out. Bob Pendoli used to be the planning director in Corte Madera. He was also the person that liaised directly with Jim Helfrich to knock down the percentage of our affordable units, which were at 20% affordable. And he worked on Jim Helfrich's pro forma to knock it down so that WinCup is now only 10% affordable. If anybody doubts what I'm saying, feel free to talk to me or other people in the room. We have emails all showing what happened. So I just say, take everybody's comments with a grain of salt, and please take the residents' comments equally as heartily as you would take organizational comments.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sue Tracy, and I represent the Marin Organizing Committee, and we are 18 churches that have formed to speak towards wanting our residents to have affordable housing and to be able to have first responders, teachers, seniors, and the physically challenged to be able to have a place to live in Marin County. So I would like to advocate towards this housing element. It seems very reasonable, and it seems like it's fair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Good evening. My name is Linda Jackson. I'm a neighbor from next door, San Rafael. And I have a couple of handouts for you. One of them is an editorial from County Superintendent for Education, Mary Jane Burke, who says, "One thing is certain, the impact of new families on our public schools should never be used as a reason for not providing affordable housing in our community." And she gives several stories to explain why that is. The other handout I have at the top is a graph of the change in Larkspur's population from 2020 to 2040. And you can see how the numbers of people who are what they call young retirees, 65 to 74, the mature retirees, 74 to 85, and the seniors, 85 and older, really increases over the next 15 years. The question is, in Larkspur, 58% of your senior households that rent are cost burdened. The renters are cost burdened. And in the last 4 years, rents have gone up 35%, and Social Security has gone up 8.5%. As I've been doing the work in housing advocacy, I've heard so many stories of seniors who have to move from Marin, where they grew up and raised their families. I've also heard stories, many stories, from senior assisted living facilities and home health care providers who are having a hard time finding people willing to make the long commute here to work at the salaries that we pay. Now, granted, we can pay a lot more than $15 an hour, but it has a big impact on our community to not have people who can work here and take care of us. This also now applies to substitute teachers in our schools and to substitute teachers in our daycare centers. It's hard to find people willing to make that commute. So the need is huge. The good news is you have a housing element that didn't need a lot of changes. It's been approved and certified. I'd say take advantage of that cost savings that come with that streamlined review and the CEQA review that's been done. Be mindful of your residents and keep all of the units that you have in your element. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathleen Mulcahy, Larkspur. I guess appropriate to say that with a mix of population in our room tonight. I wrote on my hand to be smart, because none of us are arguing on whatever we're coming forward with about our need for housing. What we're debating about really is how do we go about that? Do we turn it over to a level in which we have a little less control? Or do we keep it more local, where we can do what we've been doing well? I'm standing here saying I want to keep it local. I've been to all of the meetings, one workshop held on the Giants series, World Series, so I was one of the few of which that workshop was held, so there was not a lot of visibility. The second non-workshop public hearing was when the Planning Commission approved unanimously, unless there was one abstain, I can't remember. Yeah, one abstain. Okay, so that was two, and now we're here. So I really liked your comment, because we really haven't aired this out. Here you are, listening. I've seen this presentation 3 times. I could almost give it. And I appreciate all the consultants that are, joining us tonight. It's almost as bigger than our city staff. So we need to be smart, and I don't know that we are. And I think we need to have more dialogue to get there as a community, so that we can incorporate all the things that you're hearing tonight, because I don't know that they're in the housing element plan, nor do I think they need to be. I think we need to keep this local, and the housing element plan is not local. It's not local at all. It's a number that you're throwing at meeting a deliverable that you have a little less control over. I'm concerned in regards to, was interesting about the Mary Jane Burke comment, because I work in the school system. And we, in the district that I work in for schools, we rotate students all over our district. It's a very big high school district. And so we support all levels of our community, wherever they reside. It doesn't have to be in the same neighborhood. But I do think we're not really thinking about, like the woman said, water. We haven't brought up sewer in schools. We haven't thought about all of that thoroughly and how to best support that locally so that we can afford to do what we need to do for our kids well, instead of in my walking around the halls of Redwood High School being crammed already at capacity, even though one will say that there's room for more. I will say that for good education, you really need to start looking at funding overall. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Joan Lundstrom, Larkspur, former mayor 7 times. I'm speaking tonight, though, as a senior citizen, senior citizen, because I just celebrated my 80th birthday. I urge the council to adopt the housing element as proposed. And again, this is from the point of view of a senior citizen. I support the adoption of junior second units as a way for seniors with larger homes to get income to maintain their homes, to stay in place, and to supplement Social Security or a pension. And if adopted, I think that's an opportunity for the city to do outreach to the community to offer this as something that they can use. I also support keeping the residential over commercial in the Bon Air Center, and it has been proposed to reduce it from 90 units from when I was on the council now to 40, so that's a reduction, as was pointed out. It's an ideal place, really, for senior citizens. And senior citizens, I must note, don't go out at peak hours. We're smart. We go at off-peak hours to do all of our errands and so on. We are not adding to the peak traffic. And at the Bon Air Center, senior citizens can walk to a nearby bus stop. It's about 4 to 5 blocks to the ferry terminal. And also there's a recreational area, there's a park nearby, grocery store, bank, and everything right there. And also it would be ideal both commercial, residential over commercial areas for folks who are just starting out in their jobs, because they can do a reverse commute. We can get more people living in our own community. But basically, from the point of view of a senior citizen, I think that this makes a great deal of sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Tom Flynn. I live at 10 Willow here in Larkspur. And some of you may know me as the founding president of King Mountain Open Space Association, which Mayor Lundstrom was on the board of that association and was one of the many community volunteers that put in countless hours to preserve the mountain, and also, you know, help encourage the community to kick in what it was going to take to buy saving that mountain. And you know, that effort was really all about preserving community character and quality of life. And you know, I'm also a Larkspur homeowner who's concerned about the you know, the Wind Cup development. I don't like the design of it personally, similar to former state architect Sim Vanderen and a lot of you here. And I really appreciate your concern. I really appreciate all the...
I'm sorry, Mr. Flynn.
I'm sorry.
We're going to need to have you speak into the microphone.
All right, sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I really appreciate the concerns and the strong feelings. And, you know, in particular, you know, that development and some of the other things like at Larkspur Landing caused a lot of fear and concern. But I think it's really important to not confuse something like Wind Cup with you know, well-designed kinds of things, like, for example, the Edgewater affordable housing project that's been in the communities for a long time, and it has, you know, being well-designed, it fit in well. And you know, I also think that you know, it's important to be aware that downtown Larkspur has, you know, second story above commercial, you know, including more than 2 stories, like the classic Blue Rock Inn, you know, which Blue Rock was a hotel and now has apartment buildings upstairs. And I just think we really need to recognize that if someone wanted to tear all that out and put in a bunch of single-family housing, then we'd really have an uprising about it. But in fact, you know, I think that for the most part, you know, if we are thinking, you know, carefully about this, we can recognize that, you know, that we can have the kind of above commercial that we have in downtown Larkspur, and we can do something that, you know, takes into account what's happening with climate change and the sea level rise that we've heard about. And okay, and I'll just wrap it up and say that, you know, I I am concerned about congestion, but I also know from many, many studies that something like above the Bon Air commercial can avoid congestion, particularly for people like seniors who can live there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mimi Willard, and I live in Kentfield. And like a lot of the people you've heard from tonight, I don't live in Larkspur. But you are hearing a message tonight that's very pro-development. A lot of it's going to be market rate development. It's in excess of what you need to do for your arena numbers. And I think that the lesson from the Larkspur Landing Station Area Plan was that that wasn't what your constituents, your neighbors want. And you're in touch with what they want. Listen to what you think is the desire of your community.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Kenneth King. I'm representing the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative, and I really support your housing element. It's very modest considering the need. It addresses several parts of the population, the seniors plus very low-income workers. We can't continue to import workers and then complain about the traffic they make. You know, Marin has not had its population increase significantly in the last 30 years. But everybody can tell you the traffic has almost doubled in the last 30 years. How did that miraculously happen? It happened because we drive everywhere. Our children drive everywhere. We import services from everywhere. And then we complain that, oh, we can't have any more housing because it's going to impact our freeways and on our streets. We're the problem with the traffic. It's not 120 or 130 new units that we need to have that's the problem. And unless we address the traffic problem, because we have to look in the mirror to do that. And we have that responsibility to do that. But we certainly also have the responsibility to supply housing for the people we employ. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Randy Mason, Green Bay. I don't work for an agency or a nonprofit. I'm just your average citizen. It's my view, I don't have any data to back this up, it's my view that the overwhelming majority of your constituents in most of Marin County is against these types of developments. In my view, these developments aren't about affordable housing, it's about development with a few affordable units mixed in for good measure. The other thing I would like to say is that the idea of developing above Bon Air, I don't like that idea at all. And I think as Mr. Huroff stated earlier, when you have a set of rules, you can work within those set of rules, for example, like the findings that you suggested earlier, to not go outside of the bounds, but to reduce the number of units or the locations that need to be put into the numbers. Because the vast majority of people around here do not want this. And then regarding the comment earlier about the affordable housing units in Bon Air going down to shop at Molly Stone, when they see the Molly Stone prices, they're going to get in their car and drive to Safeway. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. David Kuhnhart from your Twin City and Corte Madera. The housing element is not a plan. It's a report. It's a report of what's already on the books, of what's already been agreed to in plan. It's not a new development. It's not a new solicitation. It's a report. I have a test. Today, if you did a little exam on Zillow today and said, tell me how many apartments are for rent in the city of Larkspur for $2,500 or less, which would, in the general range of 30% of your income, mean an income of $100,000 or less, how many apartments do you think would come up in the good city of Larkspur, where 48% of the housing units are rental apartments. 48% of the units within Larkspur are rental apartments. How many come up at $2,500 or less? Today's Zillow. Any chances? Can we hazard a guess?
I would expect pretty low.
One. This report is an unambitious report, just like the one that was made last night in my home city. Very unambitious report for a very big need. The only other comment that I would offer up is that the suggestion to take some 100% car-oriented properties like Lucky's, like Bonaire, and do something more with them is really the same as saying, bring it home. What is the best that we all see, and we in Corte Madera envy about Larkspur? It's downtown Larkspur, which has been mixed use for 100 years. It's been wonderful apartments over commercial for 100 years, as has Old Corte Madera Square. That's the form that's being suggested and has been imaginatively suggested, I think, by your staff. Just say yes to this report.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Todd Ziesing, and I live at 22 Lark Court in Larkspur. I'm also a member of the Planning Commission. I'm here to just give a little background on what we saw, or what I saw anyway, as a review of the housing element. Being a new member of the Planning Commission, I had to go through it in detail. And I probably spent about 60 hours reading it and then looking things up and asking questions of the staff and looking things up and asking questions of other people. Because for me, it was, as Kevin was talking about, a big, long learning experience. And I joined the Planning Commission because I was suspicious of government, and I'm also somebody who wants to maintain the integrity of Larkspur at its heart and its core, as everybody else, I think, wants to too, and we all have different ways of getting there. But what I learned about the housing element is that it's really a periodic response to a request by the state to meet some requirements that the state has overlaid in the entire area. And our requirement this year, and actually our requirement this period, is really all met except for 37 very low income units for the next 8 years. The rest of it's met. We've got it. We're talking here about meeting a requirement for RENA for 37 very low income units over the next 8 years. If you divide that by our population, it's less than 0.3% over an 8-year period. It's very, very modest. We're all very concerned about traffic. We're all very concerned about density. This doesn't change anything in density. As a matter of fact, what it does is it just identifies the same places that we've identified in the previous housing element and reduces the breadth of those identifications from the previous period down. So we're going in the right direction. And one of the things I learned about RENA and I learned about the state is that they kind of like communities that play in good faith to try to meet an overall requirement that the state has. I certainly have arguments with what the state requires. But the thing that I really want the state to do is to connect 580 and 101 and get the traffic out of Larkspur Landing. This is a fight that we don't need to pick in terms of the housing element. This is an easy one for us to say yes to, so we can devote more of our wood to that particular target and solve the big problem. So I would highly encourage everybody here to support the housing element. I think it's great, and I really commend Neil and his staff for all the work that they've done to get there.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Jim.
I won't take that off.
My name is Jim Lazar. I'm a 50-year resident on Alicio Drive, and I would urge the council to look for a reason to hold off on the additional units in Bonaire until we get a resolution as to how 101 and 580 is going to be resolved. There are times when if you go down Alicio between 3:30 and 6 o'clock at night, there are times when I've waited through 3 light cycles to get out of Alicio because the traffic is so impacted. Now, there's no assurance that the housing that's going to propose there, whether it's 40 units, 60 units, or whatever it grows to, is going to be seniors who don't have cars, who won't go out there between 3:30 and 6 o'clock. And I think that our issue is much deeper, having to wait and see what happens on 101 and 580 before we put any more units in and around the area there.
Okay, thank you.
Just another quick comment, David from Larkspur. I want to know, you guys are stressing this
David,
reduction.
David, we have other people that haven't spoken yet. They were starting to approach.
Oh, I'm sorry. There was no line when I stepped up. So if you'd like me to wait.
Yeah, I think we'd like to get everybody
Yeah,
given their
of
first
course,
opportunity.
there was no
first.
line. So.
Hi, I'm Marla Orth. I'm one of those seniors you speak of. I have been looking at a lot of the developments throughout the county and don't see much affordable about senior housing. Frankly, it's a lot cheaper for me to stay in my house through the time they carry me out in a pine box. There would be a point at which we will want to have caregivers, and we would like to have the latitude to be able to have caregivers come live with us, use some of those rooms that we're not. Even the zoning restrictions are still very, very onerous for anybody that contemplates that. My big issue is the transportation and the services for the seniors. We're inviting a lot more people to come here, but there's no infrastructure for seniors. There is no transportation. It's a joke. We all know that. I mean, I live 2 miles away from a bus stop. Really? I'm going to go take public transportation. I'm 2 miles away from a grocery store. So I think we do really need to look at those infrastructure requirements because those are real. And my mother-in-law, bless her heart, passed away recently at 103. She was still driving. She still had 2 years on her California driver's license. She went at peak periods just like everybody else. But I'd like to pick up on a comment that Mr. Haroff made, and that is, we don't have to accept this. We can push back. And HCD is a bureaucracy, just like every other bureaucracy, and I expect that there's going to be many changes in the years that come, especially in the next 8 years. So I would make 2 appeals. One is, why are we going for an 8-year plan when we could do a 4-year plan unless staff really doesn't want to retain their jobs? And 2, why don't we push the envelope for a change instead of accepting this top-down? Because this top-down is what's getting us in trouble, repeatedly getting us in trouble in terms of our resources. So I would like to see this council, I wish my brethren in Corte Madera had the political will to do it, to say what's best for the community, because both of our communities are built out. And that's just the hardcore reality. So I would much rather see projects be rehabbed. You know, in Corte Madera, we have the red light hotel called the Meadow Suite. I mean, they rent the beds by the hour. I would love to see that be made to affordable housing. It's right next to a park to public transportation or what have you. I'd rather see us really be creative and think outside of the box of what can we do to rehab sites and make them meet our community instead of rape and pillage what we've got. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, Council. I'm Peter Hensel from Corte Madera, and I'm here basically because I'm a fan of Larkspur. I love the place. It just is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. You have a historical component going on there that is very, very attractive. You also have a sense of space in your 2 parking lots, you know, that are down at the east end of town. And I worry very much about the Lucky property because it's a place I love to go. It's attractive. I want to go. If there are 27 new units, possibly, or maybe even more with this max allowed, what happens? Do people still want to go there even? I mean, I go there a lot because I like Bet's Flicks and I like Avatars, and there's parking. And parking is a big issue in Larkspur. And it also enhances your walkability and your livability of downtown. So what happens, if Lucky really gets developed? I'm wondering about what height limits are there. I hear what people are saying about housing above ground floor retail, but would 3 stories be allowed there? I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't delved into it enough, but wow, I don't know what to say, because I hate to see Larkspur changing too much, because there is the history there. I think you've done very well with Rose Lane, actually. I mean, it looks quite beautiful. Very, very high class. So all I can say is that it's not an easy job, to do what you guys are doing, to preserve and also allow a little bit of room for people to move in, and because nothing stays the same ever. And we do have a big need for affordable housing, but wow, don't with the parking, you really have to be careful there, because then Larkspur doesn't, if you take away too much parking, it doesn't become the attractive place that it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a couple people coming up or leaving the meeting. All right, thank you for coming.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Foreman, and I live in Greenbrae, and I'm completely against the Bon Air situation. Right now, there are about 6 vacancies. The restaurant has gone out, 2 restaurants. Citibank has gone out, and a couple of others. And one reason is because of the high rents. So how are people on fixed incomes going to shop in Bon Air when boutique-style places may be coming in? And Molly Stone's, as we all know, I live across the street, and I do not go to Molly Stone's. So I really don't get this whole thing. This is not a place that they can go to the bank and they can do things like that, but this is a pretty high-end place to shop and hang out. So I'm just saying I'm not seeing the connection here with retirements, with retiring people. And that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Woolard. I live in Greenbrae at 20 Quarter Ramon, and I am here to say I'm opposed to the Bon Air component. While I've been listening to everybody, a couple phrases have come to mind, and they are built out, shoehorn, and quality of life. My concern has to do with traffic, and I'll give a little story. Last week, I was coming down Sir Francis Drake. I entered the intersection at Wolfgrade, and I turned off at La Cuesta. It was 5:30 in the evening, and that drive of 3 blocks and half a mile took me 30 minutes. So that's the traffic concerns we have right now. To add housing at Bon Air, that's the pinch point to the on-ramp to 101. And you're just backing up more traffic on Sir Francis Drake. So our schools are full, our water is restricted, and I just wish we'd take that all into consideration. And Rose Lane looks fantastic. My friend lives there. She's having a wonderful time. But because of traffic, she has to monitor when she leaves her home and when she comes back because of all the school traffic and other traffic in the area. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anyone else like to speak? Okay, David,
I just have one quick comment.
Okay, I'll give you another.
Yeah,
another
1 minute.
round. Mhm.
Look, so you guys are stressing this whole reduction of the Bon Air from 90 to 40, but I mean, in reality, this 90 requirement is what's kept it untouched for 25 years. I mean, you guys are making this big deal as we can't make any changes, so let's keep it at 90. Make it 100% affordable. No developer will touch it. It's genius. Everybody knows this is why it was a sink. No developer will touch it. We'll probably add some other restrictions, but it could be a pretty good sink, to just bury quota, or just get rid of it because you don't need it, right? When it happens, when the renderings come out and people are going to fill the high school gymnasium again. So let's just kill it now. You're not going to be able to claim, oh, we had to have it for affordable housing, because it's just simply not. We have the 37 units. There's no legitimate there's no credible reason to keep it other than if you were trying to play deal maker to a very profitable redevelopment deal. Now, you know, there's evidence out there with Wing Cup that officials may have been compromised. I mean, we'll get into that. There's a grand jury, some people say, going on, and maybe they'll find something, but we have to anticipate this type of predatory maximization of entitlements. You can't, it wouldn't be responsible to not do that. You know, we need to plan responsible now. We need to anticipate that, you know, a developer's going to come in and maximize. We still haven't heard the max number, which is the concern. You know, like, you know, they're going to claim, oh, you want 40 units? Well, that's 20% of 200. You know, oh, that fits the 365. So I mean, could we get 200 units? I mean, we still haven't heard a no from. So we really just want your protection. You know, we want to, you know, we need your leadership to just protect us. We can always negotiate deals, but this is sort of this pre-negotiation thing that seems improper to many. So.
Okay, thank you. Anything different?
Really short. I forgot to bookend my obvious, but I should state my obvious. So the first part, the obvious, was we started the workshop on the Giants World Series for all those sports fans that didn't show up. Then we ended tonight on school holiday, vacation, Ash Wednesday across the street. So it's like you're missing all of your population. Slow it down.
Well, I don't think we
Slow
could have
it down.
anticipated a Giants going to the World Series, and we don't work a California work
And
year.
you don't
so-
anticipate the calendars that have been out for 2 years. I know. But reality is you didn't get a full audience of your locals.
All right, at this point, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Great, thank you.
Please be seated. I'd like to get the meeting reconvened. Okay, thank you. All right, public comment portion is closed for the public hearing. We'll now bring this back to the council. I'm sure that council members still have questions, so I will start to my left this time and see if Councilmember Morrison has anything she'd like to ask.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, Councilmember Hilmer.
I really appreciated the public comment. I think a lot of my questions have been answered.
Okay, Vice Mayor Way.
I think the public comment was very thorough also, and I really appreciate how we had members of the community who represented divergent, different views of this situation, and I appreciate that. A lot of my comments were and questions were answered by Councilmember Haroff's questions earlier, so I don't have any further.
Okay, Councilmember Haroff.
I think that, notwithstanding, I've kind of reserved the opportunity to ask further questions. I think my views on some of these issues can be expressed more succinctly just in commentary. So, no more questions from me.
Okay, so let's start the discussion. I think the key issue right here tonight before us is that it's really about the, Bon Air. So, I can start the discussion there if anybody would like to comment, begin that discussion. If they would rather just approach it as a total plan, then, you can start your comments there. Councilmember Hilmer?
Well, first, I agree with all the comments regarding traffic. I think that's like a prime significance to me in any of these considerations. And certainly, I think the bridge traffic, if at all possible, needs to be removed from Sir Francis Drake before really any change can be, just from my own personal perspective, thought about too seriously. But I don't think that should change the strategy that we've put in place with our general plan and previous housing elements and including this housing element. I don't think the impacts we're talking about are going to override my concerns regarding traffic, especially on Sir Francis Drake. So I think working on the traffic problem and working on the housing issue, we can do those things together. Certainly any project coming forward, the traffic impacts are going to be of premier significance and consideration. And I don't think anything proposed in the housing element reduces our local control with respect to reviewing development projects. So I'm very happy and with what's been proposed, and I commend the staff on the fair and reasonable approach that they've taken, especially with respect to how hard they worked, we all worked, to reduce the regional housing needs allocation numbers during this past cycle of Plan Bay Area. I think we were effectively representing our community in those efforts, and I think we did our best to reflect what's best for Marin. So I think what we have in front of us tonight is something, again, I'll use the words fair and reasonable. Those were words that caught my ear in the public comment. And I think that reflects the balanced approach we've taken here. We've got a great track record in managing change in our community, as I said earlier, and I think we can continue to do so. And I'm proud to be supportive of the housing element as proposed. The draft, anyway, for review by state HCD. We will have the action on adopting the final later on in the year, but I'm supportive of submitting it for review to the state. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Morrison?
When I was mayor last year, I worked with Judy Cushbaum, and she is on Commission on Aging. She represents Larkspur. And we got the whole list of all the senior citizens, and we had 6 senior lunches at Left Bank, and she and I hosted these lunches. For each lunch, we sent out 75 invitations for the seniors to come and voice their concerns, wishes for Larkspur. The ones that showed up, and we had at least 20 to 25 per luncheon, so that's around 120, 25 seniors that voiced their opinion across the table to me. Every single one of them said, we cannot afford to live here. We don't want to be kicked out of our homes. We feel isolated. We need the assistance of living closer to restaurants, to supermarkets, public transportations. These seniors did not enjoy driving, actually. They could not drive at night. They didn't want to deal with the traffic. They couldn't afford help. Families lived outside of the state or within, but far. So they wanted safe crosswalks and lighting. They wanted to feel that they can converse with others, which most of them cannot. So that was a fascinating year for me, and my heart went out to those senior citizens. Along with, I'm on the homeless policy. There's a lot of people out there, like I get emotional, that they can't afford to live here, and they're living homeless or about to become homeless. It's not right. It's not fair. So I love the comments, you know. It's right. It's the right thing to do. And I know water's a problem. I understand that. But MMWD, I think they're in the process of thinking about a desalination plant, which is something that's been in the works for a long time. I also called the superintendent, Liz Scott and Valerie Pitt. They welcome students with the measures that have just been passed. They'll make rooms for those students, for the new families, which is pretty sweet. Well, call them yourself. Anyway, so I agree with Dan Hammer. I will pass the resolution 715.
Thank you. Who would like to start on this side? Kevin?
I've been volunteered. Couple things preliminarily. Again, I want to restate what I said at the outset of my questions, which has also been repeated by others on the council, which how much I appreciate the hard work that staff put into getting us to where we are today. Whether we like the outcome or dislike the outcome, it is absolutely clear that this was a very, very difficult task to address. It's a very complicated process. I give Neil Toft in particular a tremendous amount of credit for everything that he did to try to understand what these requirements are and to make a credible attempt to comply with them. I also want to just say preliminarily that my perspectives on the housing element are not at all at odds with the sentiment, for example, that Councilmember Morrison just expressed. I mean, I think it's important, and I think we all agree it's important to provide affordable housing for people who live in our community who need it. I think it's very important for us to work out strategies that provide for accommodation to the seniors in our community. It's also important for us to be mindful of the requirements of state law. We operate within a framework of state law, and we can't just ignore it. So I think we all agree with all of those things. But I do have concerns about the process that we have gone through today. And again, this is not a criticism of staff or a criticism of council, not a criticism of anybody. But I do worry about some of the things that we have not been able to do successfully because of the manner in which the process has gone forward, largely to accommodate the opportunities that the state has created for a streamlining process. So I just want to say a couple just general perspectives, principles that kind of guide my point of view on all of this. And one of it, I'll just start out in response to one of the speakers this evening who said that this housing element is not a plan. It is a plan. It's an integral part of our general plan. It is a document that is intended, a living document, that is intended to capture the vision that we have for ourselves as a community. Now, we can disagree on what that vision may be, but it is important to know that this is a real planning exercise that we are going through. This is not a theoretical exercise. This is not just something that we're doing just for the sake of accommodating bureaucrats at HCD. This really is something that will shape what we think our community should look like going forward into the future. And that's an important responsibility that we have. And it's something I think we should all take seriously, and I believe that we all do. But I do worry about this concept that I've heard repeatedly as we've gone through the process, that this is just an exercise that we're going through to kind of satisfy HCD. It doesn't really mean anything. We'll be able to apply whatever criteria we need to apply in the future in approving individual projects. And although that is true, I do think it's important to take seriously our obligation to plan. We plan for a reason. It's to create that establish that vision for what we want our community to look like and create mechanisms for implementing it. So I don't want to really pick at individual aspects of the draft housing element, and I apologize if some of my questions at the outset this evening looked like I was doing that. I was really only trying to get some clarity on the flexibility that we have as a city council in order to do what we think is necessary to accommodate the needs and interests of our community. My concerns with the housing element really have to do less with content than with process. I do worry that the process was too rushed and rushed out of a desire to meet the streamlined review process that HCD has allowed us to do. And I think as a result of the quickness with which we have moved forward on this has really resulted in an inadequate public buy-in to the housing element that's before us tonight. And I think it's very critical for us to make sure that we do at least provide the opportunity for that public buy-in to occur. And I don't think that we can do it with the process that has been envisioned where we would approve the draft housing element that's before us tonight. and then just send it up to HCD, have them do their thing, do an addendum to the prior environmental review documents that have been out there without a full vetting in a public review process that I think CEQA ordinarily would accommodate and accomplish. I do worry that as we've gone through this kind of streamlined process, we've been putting too much focus on what we think will be credible with HCD. I've heard that expression a number of times. What will fly with HCD? What will be credible with HCD? What will fly with HCD is what many communities do. It's a standard reliance on existing zone sites without necessarily a focused consideration and establishment of realistic expectations about whether those individual sites will be developed and what that development will look like, or a consideration of potential environmental impacts. And I know I talk about CEQA a lot. CEQA is an important statute for me. I think it is a very useful way to get some of these issues that I've been focusing on in terms of public impact and process, or public input and process, out on the table. I also worry, just in terms of content, that we're losing an opportunity with this draft housing element to really pursue some innovative strategies like second units, recognizing that we might get some pushback from HCD because we don't have a track record, considerations of that sort. But I do think we are the masters of this document. And it is up to us to look for every opportunity and every strategy that we can identify that will accommodate what our interests are within the framework of state law. And I would have liked to have seen a much more aggressive utilization of the second unit concept in this document. I think that might have created opportunities to allow us to meet our regional mandates without necessarily relying on certain individual sites that have caused a lot of controversy tonight, like WinCup. So for those process-related considerations, I'm not going to support adoption of the draft housing element tonight. I understand that if my view is adopted by council, that might result in some additional delays in the process that would lead ultimately to adoption of a housing element. It could jeopardize some options that may be available to us for streamlining. I understand that there are administrative costs associated with those consequences, but I think on balance, allowing a more protracted process with more well-defined opportunities for public input in response to public considerations is worth that consequence. So as I said, for those principled, process-oriented reasons, I'm not going to support adoption of the draft housing element tonight. That's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Morrison had a question for the planning director.
Neil, our height limit is 35 feet. Is that correct?
Excuse me, that's the height limit defined for the site at Bon Air. The height limit for most of the commercial districts is 25 feet or 2 stories.
And what is WinCup?
I think it goes between 3 and 4 stories. 4 stories?
Right.
I think it's.
I'm thinking of footage.
Some of it's
40,
3 and some of it's 4.
Yeah, and it's 40 units to the acre built.
Right, that I understand. I was just thinking of footage.
Okay, Vice Mayor Way.
Thanks, Kevin, for that. I wanted to hear your comments before I spoke on mine because I appreciate hearing your expertise on some areas that I am not an expert at, nor have worked in that field before. So thank you for coming forward with that. I, like Planning Commissioner Todd Zeising, spent a lot of time reading this housing element. And I really appreciate the staff's detail of what they did, especially for someone who has an opportunity to learn about housing elements for the first time and how important it is to a community. I also took the time to meet with a lot of people in the community who represent various viewpoints. Everything from absolutely no development and put a wall around the town to people who think this is not enough. So I've spent a lot of time trying to understand where all of those arguments come from, as well as meeting with staff and asking a lot of questions. We had a lot of emails, and believe me, I've read all of them and have really looked at what the various arguments are one way or the other, and what our law and responsibility is as a council member and as a city. There's a couple of things I need to point out that helped me make this decision, and that comes from this thorough analysis that our planning commissioners, that our planning department did. And that is to really look at what our housing need analysis is that they've put in here. Some of the key things I think it's helped me in making this decision is that the senior population in Marin is supposed to increase about 26%, which is 1 out of 4 of us will be over the age of 65. And that's a very that's a population that's very limited and they have a lot of difficulty in obtaining housing due to their fixed income and unemployment. And we heard some of those comments tonight. I think that's a really relevant thing that we need to think about in Larkspur. They also have specialized housing needs with smaller homes and more accessibility. One thing I think is key that I didn't know about Larkspur until I ran for office is that 48% of Larkspur residents live in multifamily homes now. They live in apartments, they live in condominiums, they live in a 14-story Tamalpais senior housing. This almost 50% of registered Larkspur residents live in this type of housing that we're talking about. And 51% of Larkspur residents rent their residences. They rent either their homes or they rent their apartments or condominiums already. And only less than 50% of ours live in owner-occupied homes. So we have a very interesting combination of housing components in this town, very different from much of what Marin has. The other thing that really stuck out with me was the cost of housing. There's been a 64% increase in the cost of buying a detached single-family home in the last 15 years here. I mean, everyone knows their home values have gone up, but that requires a salary of $175,000 for a family of 4, and that's pretty significant. That's a lot of money, and a lot of members of our community don't have that. And someone else mentioned it tonight that rent has gone up 24%. We have significant issues dealing with housing. The thing that really struck me too is that 41% of all Larkspur households fall in the extremely low, the very low, and the low income categories. I had no idea that we have that many people who live among us who really are within the extremely low category. Then I try to look at what are our affordable units that we have in Larkspur. We really don't have very many. We have 159. 159 for a population of about 14,000, a little less in Larkspur. It's a very small amount for our community. And of that 159, 77 are of the moderate income amount. That's not even including the very low income. So that was very compelling information here. But then I stopped and I looked at Section 3, which is our vision and values, because part of what we have to do as a council, we're policy setters about what Larkspur's vision is, and we help planning staff and we help city staff try to adopt policies that reflect our policy visions. And here we have it on Section 3. And I'm not going to read all of them because a lot of them were echoed tonight. But our housing vision and goals are for people to live, work, and play here. And many people mentioned that tonight, workforce housing. And we need housing choices to fit different needs. This is number 2. Larkspur values human dignity. We have encouraged creativity and design in the types of housing. And we have support systems for housing to help the disenfranchised. These are our goals that we've articulated in our community. We value open space, and we value a city that's friendly with a lot of civic pride. I think that's very true. And I think that what I have seen in this housing element is meeting those goals. It identifies reasonable locations for the 4 types of housing elements, housing unit stock that we need to provide. It doesn't involve streamlining. It's an 8-year process. It doesn't skip over any other review processes. It doesn't rezone anything. And it does allow Larkspur to reasonably plan for the next 8 years until this cycle ends in 2023. I went to the Planning Commission meeting, and I think I came away with lots of different ideas that I've worked on over the last couple of weeks. But one of the commissioners said that it was a conservative, credible, and creative plan. that embraces locations that a built-out community like Larkspur has to do to embrace. And I think it actually creates some pretty modest goals for the next 8-year cycle. I'm very supportive of it, and in fact, I think we need to do a lot more. I think we have a lot of people in this community who are at the borderline of losing their homes or are moving from Larkspur or moving from Marin. But that's for another day, and I think we'll keep working on those issues as we go along. I'm supportive of this, and I really appreciate city staff's providing such comprehensive detail for me to do the analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Yeah, I would agree with what every one of my council colleagues have stated, and also with Councilmember Haroff in a sense that, this process can be a lot better. The whole affordable housing thing could be a lot better. I mean, I've said to people that, it's not perfect, because one of the things we set out to do many years ago when I started on the council was this was meant to get people to live and work in their same community. But, housing law being what it is, you can't discriminate. So, it's done by lottery system, and you don't always achieve, what you set out to do, or those particular, dynamics just don't necessarily line up with, what you started to do. The other thing is, from the economics of a developer, on the one hand, you've created affordable homes for somebody, but, they still have a number they need to meet. And ultimately, you create another class of people who can't afford homes. Those are the ones where the price of the homes at the moderate level get increased, and, now they don't, people who could or may have, if everything all being equal, now they're not able to. But, this, right now, it's probably the best system we have to work with. Everyone knows that, back in 2006, I still feel beat up over working with ABAG. So I can't exactly say I totally agree with, their formulas and things like that. I've found a lot of flaws in them myself. But, if we were to look at just everything that's placed before us, just Larkspur, and the decisions we have to make, you have all these other outside influences, whether they're legal or otherwise. But, the one thing that we have said in previous council meetings, as well as our council workshop a couple weeks ago, is that, Larkspur is at the crossroads of two of the heaviest traveled roads in the county. And, if people are stuck in traffic, and boy, today I was, had to go over to Greenbrae. It's, the whole county is growing up around us. You look at the statistics that were presented in the housing element, our population hasn't gone up in a decade. And depending on which census report you have, you're either flat on the housing or just a tad over. So a lot of the contribution to our situation is coming from communities that are outside of Larkspur, and we got to keep working together on this. And one of the things that I've also met with a lot of groups and individuals, much the way my council colleagues have, and nobody has a solution for me. Because if I have to move the homes out of Greenbrae, where am I going to put them? We're totally built out. All we're doing is pitting one neighborhood in Larkspur against another. And that's exactly what I heard. And that's not good either. That's why when we saw that one graphic up there with all the red and blue dots or whatever it was, that was actually something that I did because I was trying to get a picture of the distribution of where all the various things that we had done in the past were. And, we've got them spread out in the 3 or 4 the only places we can really put them in order to achieve the types of densities that you need in order to get affordability. They have to really go in our commercial zones, because the rest of our zones are single-family detached dwellings, 5 units per acre. So, you're talking about downtown Larkspur, which we fought a big battle over in 2006. I came up on the short side of the 3-2 vote, but we did what we had to do to get the best we could out of that development, and we heard tonight people like it. The reason why they like it was we had a planning process after we approved the policies that allowed for a highly scrutinized project to make it fit within the capacity as well as the characteristics of downtown Larkspur. So we got 2.5 acres of land, a little bit less. Now it's going to be a community facility and a library. We got some mitigation on traffic because some seniors can choose to drive at other times of the day. Seniors also have fewer kids per household, so we provided some mitigation on the impact of schools. And we also asked for a 50-foot setback on the creek to provide for habitat restoration, even though this was considered an infill property. So, yeah, I'm not going to come out and say trust us, but we already have existing documents to support the type of land use policies either within our general plan or specific plans or plan development, zoning, or anything within our zone, so that hopefully if our planning commission and our council looks at new proposals in these areas where they're designated in our housing element, that certain circuit breakers will exist so that we can call ourselves on it and say, that's not right, that's not in the characteristic of Larkspur. Now, one of the things I want to point out also is, we don't want to pit one neighborhood against another. We don't want to pit one city against another either, because I can point out that Green Bay Kentfield's sphere of influence, we got half that allocation. So do we go back in 8 years in Larkspur and saying, wow, you're placing a huge burden on us. Our residents are beating up on us and everything else. Let's push these back upstream a couple miles and say, let them deal with their own number. But, as part of, I guess you can say, being a team player within, this Marin community, the countywide plan is that everything gets developed along the 101 corridor, and that's why we got pushed the extra housing allocation in the sphere of influence. One thing I also want to think about, and I've been giving it hard thought to Councilmember Haroff's comments also, not his specifically, but just the idea of, well, how far can we push this and how hard should we be pushing it? And, we've always tried to push as hard as we could, but recognizing that there is a fiduciary responsibility that we have as well. One of them comes in terms of cost. Are we going to win this? The second question is, what other risk are we subjecting ourselves to? There was a slide earlier that takes everything from court order mandates all the way to having effectively what is receivership of your planning department. So it's bye-bye Neil. We don't need a planning director anymore, right? Because the courts have assigned a judge to do that. But when we look at the streamlining, the way I view it, after looking at some of the statistics that I calculated, roughly for myself, and I can't get my laptop back up because it just went into sleep mode, and I'm not going to bring it back up. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at California Department of Finance projections over the course of the next 5 years and 10 years, and they are the official demographic source for California, not ABAG, we expect a 900-person increase in our population in both those 5-year increments. But what you see in the next 5-year increment is something like 338,000 more people in the Bay Area. Now, if you, if you extrapolate that number and use exactly the same formula that they did in the last planning cycle, that means an extra 87 units for Larkspur in 4 years. Okay, so what the streamlining process does is really, in my view, protects us from having to go through this process, irrespective of the costs, but having to burden us with potentially anywhere, I'm going to give a plus and minus 20 range, anywhere from 60 to 100 more units. And personally, I'm not willing to take that risk for our community because, like everyone's pointed out already, we're totally built out. So they come back to us and say 87 more units in 4 years, and we're going to be going back well beyond 40 units for Greenbrae, and now we're going to be tacking on another bunch of units in Clasp again downtown, and now we're going to have to be looking at properties like McLaren and rethinking whether that should be medium density or not. What we've done is to preserve our general plan in exactly the point that it is, without any modifications, for properties that have already existed for, in some cases, 3 or 4 planning cycles, and for Bon Air, I can't remember, 2006? Is that right? Yeah, so that's 2 planning cycles, 2006 and 2010. So to make a long-winded story short, I will also support the majority of my colleagues who will ask that this draft of the housing element be forwarded to HCD. I think we kind of split it because I think it's also a risk reducing from 90 to 40, but we'll see. If they kick it back, we'll have to have that discussion again. So I will entertain a motion unless another council member would like to comment further.
Okay, can I make that motion?
Sure.
I'd like to have a motion to pass resolution number 715, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Larkspur approving the 2015-2023 draft housing element for submittal to the California Department of Housing and Community Development.
Okay, we have motion, second.
I second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Any noes?
No.
Okay, let the record show that Councilmember Haroff casted a dissenting vote. Okay, that concludes the public hearing for the housing element, and we have nothing else on our agenda tonight, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion, second.
I'll second that.
Second, all in favor say aye.
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 Okay, thank you for coming tonight, and thank you,
Yes,
staff.
thank you for all your comments.
Thank you to the staff.